This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Are these stocks under-owned by institutional Wall Street?
A lot of these companies talking about generative AI.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Investors just worried about the ongoing sales slump in China.
And Michael Barr with news.
A ship traveling through the southern Red Sea has been attacked.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Where to begin on a Wednesday? We're supposed to slide into the 4th of July holiday. Paul Sweeney, we're not doing that. The news flow, extraordinary.
Extraordinary, Tom. We got a lot of economic data here today coming out. We have initial jobless claims, 235,000 is the number.
It's a big deal now.
It's coming at 8:30. The
Yeah,
Fed's looking at that. And then tomorrow, certainly Friday, Tom, we're coming back in here after the 4th for non-farm payrolls. That'll be coming out Friday again. So a lot of employment data coming out. We got some ISM services data coming out at 10 a.m. this morning. So a lot for the market and the Fed to chew on.
It's going to be interesting to say the least. We're going to sell you a lot on that today. We will be here, the full team, on Friday. We'll get you up to 8:30. You need to stay focused. Stay with us at least till 8:35.
Oh, yeah.
Friday morning.
Exactly.
Okay, maybe 8:45.
Exactly.
We will look at the politics of the nation. The nation is France. To the polls on Sunday, there's some amazing dynamics there. Full disclosure, I don't fully understand them. There is a vote within 18 hours in the United Kingdom. Lizzie Burden and the team, They may be under restrictions right now, but what they say can say. They have different rules than we do.
They do.
Their punditry is way different legally, but in the United Kingdom, a key vote, it seems to be a seismic change in the polity of the United Kingdom. And in America, we'll let you pick your newspaper, your website at Bloomberg News. Jordan Fabian and the rest are just trying to report moment by moment what's going on with the President of the United States and the rest of the story that we're all riveted to. Kit Jukes will be with us here coming up, Paul.
Yep.
It's not even a headline. Euro yen 174.
Wow. Yep.
Excuse me, 174.25. That is weak yen, unimaginably weak yen. Sort of feel like they have to raise interest rates. Margie Patel on use of cash here in a moment. We're on YouTube. We're on Apple CarPlay, Android Auto as well. With the Bloomberg Business Flash, the Interactive Broker Studios, Lisa Mateo.
Good morning. Yeah, we've got a lot going on. This is futures, little changes ahead of a busy day for economic data before the 4th of July holiday. They're trying to pack it all in before everyone heads out. Today, we'll get jobless claims for last week, trade deficit in goods and services, durable goods orders, also data on America's service providers. And on top of that, the Fed also issuing minutes from June's meeting on interest rates. Yesterday, you had Chair Jay Powell say central bankers, they want a little bit more evidence that inflation is easing before they start lowering rates. Right now, we have NASDAQ futures, little change up about 7 points, down futures up about 0.1%, up 50 points, and S&P futures, little change up about 2 points. We have the 2-year yield 4.76%, that's up 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year 4.43%, and that is little change. Shares of Paramount, you talked about it, up 9%. Sources say Skydance Media has reached a preliminary deal to buy National Amusements, merge it with Paramount. Then meanwhile, sources say Paramount in exclusive talks to sell its BET network for about $1.6 billion. So a lot going on there. Then you have Southwest Airlines, this headline just coming across, that starts rights plans in response to Elliott taking a stake. Their shares are little changed right now. And finally, Alaska Air, its unionized flight attendants, they're set to receive an average pay increase of 32%. It's a new record contract. That's what Alaska Air union reps are saying with the carrier. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
So
Thank you.
So Lisa, you know on the Alaska airplanes on the tail?
Yes.
There's
It's gorgeous.
an image of what?
An Alaskan, I don't know.
Like
Eskimo?
an Eskimo? I thought for the longest time until just
that not
recently,
proper?
Tom, I thought it was Jerry Garcia. So I'm sitting in the SeaTac airport about
Okay, I can see that.
7-8 years ago saying, hey, to a pilot from SeaTac, boy, your airline is so cool. You have Jerry Garcia image on your tail fin. He's like, no, you knucklehead. It's an Eskimo.
Oh, it is an Eskimo.
Yes,
Okay.
Rich, can you get that on tape so we can play that at Sweeney's retirement party?
I thought it was Jerry Garcia for
Put
like
that on
ever.
tape. Stop the show. I'm going to stop the show right now, folks, because we got something really, really special for you. Eric Marlowe and I are going to try to figure out how to get this out on Single Best Eye. It is the single best idea of Richard Truman.
Who?
A special 1 hour Bloomberg Daybreak. Daybreak is a show before us.
Yep.
I never listened to it. A 1 hour Bloomberg Daybreak. Dan Ives and Gene Munster, Rich together.
How did Rich get them together?
Talk together.
Awesome.
This is like huge for the Bulls and the Bears of this technology moment we're living. You're going to see it tonight at 6 p.m., tomorrow, 5 a.m., 10 a.m., 3 p.m. I'm trying to get it out as a podcast. We'll see if we can do that. We got to talk to different committees.
And people.
Everybody's out at the golf course. What can I say? They're in a foursome with Damien Sassower.
Right.
But anyways, this is special. Ives, Munster, a special Bloomberg Daybreak. We'll have much more on that. Taking way too much time. Terry Haynes, by the way, just will be with us here in 20 minutes. Margie Patel has been patient, and we welcome her today because with the news flow, we are so far off the core mission, which is use of cash of this capitalistic system. She is definitive at use of cash. Margie, what are dividends and dividend growth going to do to the end of the year?
Well, I think you're right to continue to chug along, and I think earnings will be at, say, an 8 to 10% annualized rate for the rest of the year, pretty much like the first half of the year. And it's interesting, companies have been raising their dividends in the second quarter, year over year. Dividends are up about 6.5%. So that says companies have cash that they can deploy to shareholders.
Hey, Margie, I've been looking at the fixed income space here, and I look at the INGO function on the Bloomberg terminal. That gives me the Bloomberg index browser for all the fixed income indexes around the world. You know, some of the best performance has been in U.S. high-yield corporate debt. What's going on in the high-yield market?
Well, the fundamentals have really never been greater. Bankruptcies are very low, even though the Fed has raised rates a lot, say 4% or less than 4%. And also I'd say, if anything, there's actually scarcity of high yield bonds. This year supply's up a lot. However, 3/4 of the issuance is to refinance other debt. So net, there really isn't that much out for people to reinvest their coupons or to put new cash in.
So, I mean, I guess the reason it surprised me that high yield has done so well is because there's been so much talk over the last year, or maybe 2 years, of just about an impending recession. Of course, we haven't seen it, but despite that backdrop, high yield has done, I guess, fairly well. Are there any sectors that are leading the way?
No, I would say high yield realistically is for somebody who's interested in the income. The year to date, the returns in the high yield market is, say, 2 to 3% total return, including what you've earned in the coupon income. Modest compared to equities, but corporate bonds in general, high yield and investment grade, have outperformed treasuries. For a yield-oriented investor, they're not bad.
Margie, with immense respect, I ask you this question. I had a mini tantrum yesterday. Lisa had to hold my hand and medicate me. And Margie, it was over the institutional Wall Street bond people rationalizing away the losses our listeners and viewers have taken in bonds. Over the last 3 years, I believe it's been price down, yield up. How do those people recover?
Well, I think they have to change their focus. And it's interesting, when the Fed started to raise rates, the conventional wisdom was go to quality, that would be treasuries, better quality investment grade, and that was actually the wrong sectors to be in. The best sector performance since 22 has been high yield bonds. So people were just looking at the conventional rule book that said go up in quality. It was wrong. Just like on equities, get defensive in value stocks, wrong. I think they should really look at allocating more money into stocks or into better quality high yield bonds, because they offer a little bit of yield, 2% more, but they should be safe.
Margie, one final question. Can the Red Sox catch the Orioles?
That's a tough one for me, Tom.
Okay, thank you. Margie Patel, somewhere in the vicinity of Fenway Park in Boston. Margie Patel, thank you so much. She is with Allspring, and we can't do it right now, but we'll explain the importance of Margie Patel, a voice here on clipping coupons and finding total return. What a shock. There's green on the screen.
Yep.
With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom. Paul, Lisa, President Biden is blaming his travel schedule for his disastrous debate performance last week. He'd been to Europe for D-Day and the G7 summit, and then in Los Angeles for a fundraiser, and his advisors also say he was battling a cold. We get more with Bloomberg's Kevin Whitelaw.
We've heard it's a cold. We've heard it's jet lag. I think that all of this is still essentially making the same point, which is the president is an older man. And obviously, I think the context here is that so is Donald Trump. Their age difference really isn't that different. I do think what may start to play down the line is obviously the way age is playing out sort of differently for each of them, and what that means maybe for the presidency.
Bloomberg's Kevin Whitelaw. Biden will meet with the Democratic governors today and will interview with ABC on Friday. Meanwhile, Vice President Kamala Harris is the top alternative if Joe Biden decides to end his election campaign. That's according to a Reuters report citing 7 senior people at the Biden campaign, the White House, and the Democratic National Committee. Last-minute campaigning across Great Britain today. Voting begins tomorrow. Polls predict a Labour landslide victory, booting Conservative Prime Minister Rishi Sunak out of office. Jamaican Prime Minister Andrew Holness last night declared the entire island a disaster area for the next 7 days. That's a cause of Hurricane Beryl. It is expected to weaken a bit, but according to Holness, it's expected to make landfall with winds of 120 to 140 miles per hour.
Hurricane Beryl is the earliest Category 5 hurricane on record. It highlights the growing impact of climate change on global weather patterns, particularly on small island developing states like Jamaica.
Earlier, Beryl killed at least 6 people and caused significant damage in the Southeast Caribbean. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
So the news flow is just extraordinary, folks. I don't even know, I got like 8 ways to go here right now. But I think we got to look at the hurricane. It's June, on the edge of July. And this thing is like New Orleans ginormous, right?
And was a Cat 5 once. That's really what's monster.
And heading for Jamaica.
Heading directly for Jamaica, and then
like
later.
Wait, I got a piece of land there. South Shore Jamaica or North Shore?
Now that I'm not sure of, because
okay,
it depends on how this
that.
thing travels.
Jamaica's a huge island. It's not a smaller island, but still, the devastation. I haven't looked at the map yet.
Well, keep in mind, by early next week, this is going to hit South Texas also, or at least some of the remnants of it.
Yeah.
So this is a mess.
In Mexico, yeah.
But there's more. Like I saw one report, a guy out on YouTube doing a weather channel. There's already a C letter, and then there's got to be a D letter, E letter. I mean, this is because the waters are warmer, right?
Yes.
I'll tell you, but the waters at the Jersey Shore are frigid. I don't know what's going on, so we'll have to figure that out.
That happened some years. I spent a lot of time at a place called Nauset Beach on Cape Cod, and some years it would be 52 degrees. It'd be like Maine.
Yeah.
I mean, Gura throws his kids in the waters in Maine.
Exactly. Rub the dock. Yep.
If you're not good, you're going to the water.
Exactly.
That's what it'd be like. Michael Barr, thank you so much. Are you going to be with us here Friday?
Oh yeah, you're stuck with me. just like that hound dog on the porch.
You get the room at the Regency, right?
Yeah.
You and the fam.
We call it the Subaru. That's what we do.
Okay, very, very good. We'll all be here Friday at 8:30, a jobs report, and ever more critical here as we move to a snapshot of where we're moving ahead. Please stay with us. Red and green on the screen right now. The VIX under a 12 yesterday, 12.13. It's Bloomberg Surveillance.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Little movement in futures, and this has optimism about U.S. interest rates cuts after Federal Chair Jay Powell. He said inflation getting back toward this downward path. So we want to get to it right now. We have Nasdaq futures, little change, down about 5 points. Dow futures up about 32 points. S&P futures, they're little changed as well. We have the 2-year yield at 4.76%. That's up 2 basis points. The 10-year yield 4.43%, and that is little change. Globally, a lot of the spotlight continues to be on politics. We have the stock 600 up about 0.8%. The CAC and Paris up more than 1.5%. To currencies, we have the dollar weaker, Japanese yen weaker at 161.93 against the dollar. The euro stronger, British pound stronger. Bitcoin down more than 2% at about 60,000. Current Eli Lilly shares up more than 0.5% right now. It won FDA approval for its new drug to slow Alzheimer's. Those shares of rival Biogen also are lower this morning. Sanofi ADR is up more than 0.5%. Its blockbuster drug Dupixent, it was cleared by the EU for patients with a chronic lung disorder. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Thanks so much, Lisa. I appreciate that right now. We now begin a 3-hour conversation with Kit Jukes, because that's how much is going on. A cardinal rule, folks, is the litmus paper of the global system is the foreign exchange market, and it is denoted by pairs and by the dynamics of flows and interest rate differentials. In this time of chaos, Kit Jukes joins us. Kit, I'm looking at a chart of Japanese 10-year yield back 35 years. And the yield moved from 7%, a great moderation, down to 2014 of 0%. And now we've come up. Where's the tip point on Japanese yield where Japan and the rest of us fall apart? How much higher does that yield have to go?
I guess at one level, if they can get their nominal GDP growth rate high enough, you can get it to be okay. The advantage they have is that the bonds that are out there with higher yields now, the coupon that they're paying on them is still the low one that the bonds were originated with. If they have to issue new bonds with higher coupons, then they're paying a lot more money on their debt to investors. But if they can get the nominal growth to match that, they're kind of okay in the long run. But I think in that sense, I think in a market sense, if we move too fast, if they don't get nominal growth, if inflation, flatters to deceive again by trying to come back, then frankly, another 1% in yields will be a deeply scary long-term position for us all in terms of what it means.
One more question on Japan. Kit, what does it mean to us? I mean, the basic idea here is if Japan falls apart with euro-yen 174, unimaginable, if the yield moves up from 1.1% up near 2%, just to say for cocktail conversation, what does that mean for our listeners and viewers?
The first piece, if the currency gets weak enough, they can continue to go and book themselves in next year for cherry blossom viewing in Japan, because it'll be affordable still. More seriously, the U.S. is the world's biggest borrower of money. Most of the world's money is invested in the United States at this point because it's exceptional. The biggest providers of that money, in other words, the biggest net saving economies that finance the United States, are China, Japan, and Germany. They're the three biggest. There's a bunch of others. So if you take out the country that's the biggest net saver in the world, that has the biggest holdings of foreign assets because they've been saving so much for so long, then the U.S., which relies on importing capital to finance its growth, runs into trouble. So we're all joined at the hip. And in that sense, a balanced global economic system where aging savers in the other parts of the world finance dynamic Mag 7 stocks or whatever it is in the United States is a good place. But if you let it get out of kilter, we're going to run out of money.
Kit, your second half outlook yesterday, it's titled, "When Will the Dollar's Appeal Fade?" That's a great question. What's a good answer to that?
I think the good answer is when the Fed is cutting interest rates. This is the third really big dollar rally of my working life. And I came in late to the last one because I started work in 1984 and the dollar was flying when I arrived. And I kind of feel I understand that one better than the others. But if I went back and said, in 1985, the dollar peaked after the Fed had started cutting rates, it gave back all the gains that it had from 80 to 85. It gave them back by 87. There wasn't a recession. There were rate cuts, but there wasn't a recession. Carry trade unwound. In 95, it started on its way up again, and it peaked in 2001. And it gave it all back pretty much by 2004. Again, I mean, there were lots of rate cuts, but the recession then it's not really a recession. It's statistically anymore now. So I'm working on the assumption that you don't change this story of the U.S. having more accommodative fiscal policy, higher rates, stronger growth, and a strong currency until rates are coming down. And unfortunately, I'm not sure that's going to happen this year.
All right. So given that scenario, I mean, where is value out there? Where do you see value in the currency markets these days?
I mean, I struggle because we have a very expensive dollar that struggles to get.
Right.
So buying the dollar is buying an expensive currency that looks the best to them. I think the Australian dollar looks attractive. The Australians have a reasonable shout. They might be one of the big economies other than Japan that could be raising interest rates this year, and their currency has been pretty beaten up. So I think that's a decent shout. Their growth numbers look good. They have a very tight labor market. Obviously, a lot of immigration coming into that economy. So they have a good chance of getting some strength. They need China to stabilize. The whole of the Asia bloc is tied in with that. Over in Europe, not in the euro, but still the Norwegian kroner. There's a country which doesn't need to cut rates much further, really, at all. In fact, and if they want their currency to strengthen, they just have to put less money in their oil fund, and it'll go shooting up. Those are probably the two I would identify today.
Got to go off the remit here. I'm looking at Labor's looking like Arsenal, and conservatives, the Tories are looking like the Tots. What happens the morning after this election, Kit Jukes? Give us an anecdote that you see within your United Kingdom.
I think my challenge with it is various people have asked me along the way, so how terrible could it be with Labour? And I said, well, really? I mean, after the last, after what we've seen from the present government in the last few years, it's hard to imagine something worse than that for financial market folks, at least, in terms of how it goes. So I think we come in and we stare around with a certain amount of apprehension and say, right, the other team gets a chance now. Please don't blow it. Please don't blow it. And we wander around waiting to see what they do with very low expectations and hoping that they can away from some of the sort of stuff and the political stuff, just make this economy grow a bit.
Kit Jukes, thank you so much. He's with Society and General. Kit Jukes, vote early, vote often. That's what I would recommend.
Exactly.
The date calendar, folks, I believe it's July 3rd today.
Yes, it is.
Tomorrow is Kit Jukes' United Kingdom election.
That's right.
Sunday is the French final election of the two votes, July 7.
Yep.
Muchada Rahman of Eurasia Group publishing moments ago on Twitter some form of calculation where the Le Pen conservatives do not get to majority.
Okay.
They get close, maybe. You don't know. But they don't get to majority.
Okay.
And then, Paul, do you know where we are in the United States of America Monday morning?
No.
I don't think I do.
No, I don't. And we get to wait till November. There's something about those snap elections that's kind of attractive to me. You don't have to wait around months and months and months. You just kind of call a snap election a couple of weeks later. You know what's going on. But so we'll see how it plays out.
Our voices here, which we're trying to get that are on the edge of fair and balanced, are all exhausted. We are thrilled that Terry Haynes will join us here in 5 minutes. He said the single smartest thing I heard in his note published late the night of this debate, and that was simply all that matters is the polls.
Yep.
And now we're really beginning to see polls.
Yep.
We'll talk to
we are.
Mr. Haynes about that here in moments. Red and green on the screen on Friday, the jobs report at 8:30. We'll be here. We hope you're with us on YouTube, Apple CarPlay, and Android Auto. Good morning. Bloomberg Surveillance.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Little movement in futures as this holiday shortened week. Right now you have NASDAQ futures, little change, down about 3 points. Dow futures, little change as well, up 26 points. S&P futures, they're little change. The 2-year yield, 4.76%. That's up 2 basis points. The yield on the 10-year, 4.43%. And that is little changed. Quick check of commodities. We have spot gold higher, $2,345 an ounce. Brent crude, $86 a barrel. WTI crude at $82 a barrel. Companies making news. We'll start with Apple. Sources saying the company is going to get an observer role on OpenAI's board. Their shares down about 0.2%. Then you have Japanese tech investor SoftBank. It closed at a record high. Its telecom arm continues to invest in generative AI. Those ADRs up about 2%. And we'll check back in with Tesla shares, still higher, up more than 2% after that less dramatic drop in its EV sales. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Let's get right to it. Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. Joining us from Claridge's in London, where the king had him fly in to report on the UK election. T. Haynes, he's covering all the different elections. We look for him to be in Paris here by Saturday. Terry, thank you so much for finding the time to be us. Really, really appreciate it. The question I have within the blistering news flow and the rumors and all that, is there a process where Democrats can sue, legislate, cajole, so there isn't just a simple process from the President of the United States to the Vice President? Can we actually get a process before the election, before the convention?
I think that depends entirely on whether Biden, frankly, takes a second strike. Jim Clyburn said that, Biden gets 3 strikes just like everybody else. But in this case, I think he gets 2 strikes. He gets the opportunity to come back from this. But if he doesn't come back from this sometime in the next 4 months, then the wheels are going to start to turn. And I commend, by the way, the work that the Bloomberg team did on a flow chart. I think it was either Monday or Tuesday. About the different outcomes and when they might happen, how they might happen. It's a very, very useful stuff. But it is, bottom line is Biden's not going anywhere. He's going to try to make a comeback. He's going to try to say it's everything from jet lag to whatever else it is. But this will carry on. And I think, frankly, counterintuitively, he's got some reason to believe he can do that.
So, Terry, is it entirely up to President Biden how this plays out, or should we be looking to some other factors, some other players, whether it be former Presidents Obama, Clinton, whether it be big donors, or is it just what President Biden really wants to do?
Fundamentally, it's Biden. The party, the party apparatus is atrophied compared to a generation ago. There's a variety of reasons for that, and that's a whole other conversation. But politics is much more personal than the parties these days, so it's really up to Biden. Absent a situation where you get large donors completely fleeing, not only from Biden himself, but maybe from the party generally, do you get a situation where that might change? Otherwise, he's going forward.
So, what does the I'm sorry,
okay, Tom.
What does the convention look like now, Terry?
The Democratic convention, it looks very, very virtual, and it looks more virtual all the time.
How can we do that? I mean, how are they going to, forget it, folks. I don't want to get into Republican, Democrat. Terry Haynes, how do they sell a virtual convention to all of America? I don't get it.
I don't, frankly, I think intuitively, I don't really get it either. I mean, I think it looks weak and it looks bad. It looked weak and bad before the debate, frankly. I told one of your colleagues privately about a month ago when they were first bandying this around, because they kept these rules from 2020 in place that allowed the virtual convention. They were all supposedly concerned about disorder on the streets of Chicago as a result of protest riots. And I said, that's all true, but you watch this space. If there's a problem, they're going to try to wrap up the nomination early. And sure enough, that's what they're doing.
So, Terry, how do you expect the Democratic Party to kind of, just kind of act and kind of coordinate over the next several days and weeks? Or is it going to rally behind the president, or will the Democratic Party maybe itch for some new alternatives?
I think there's a little of both, frankly, Paul. They'll do their best to rally behind the president. The president will do his best to get the party to rally behind him. Right now, what you've got is, think about it as concentric circles. The people in the Democratic Party that are objecting to the president continuing are at the far outside of those concentric circles, and not decision makers, not influencers, not anything else. But what they're going to have to do is embark on a risky strategy, but it is a strategy, and you've already seen some of it, where they have to put the president out there in more or less candid avails, and show him being having everything going for him. They need to show him being passionate, being angry, being whatever. You saw a bit of that with the Supreme Court decision the other day. They'll have to continue that, and they'll try to manage it as much as possible. But that's their hope to keep the ship afloat, because otherwise he has another bad moment. I think all bets are off.
If you're just joining us on YouTube, Apple CarPlay, Android, and Bloomberg 1130 around the world, Terry Haynes joins us from London here, an historic moment for our politics. Terry, I'm going to go to Modi of India, but it was before that. There has been a populist scream. There has been a primal movement against entrenched globalization, entrenched business elites, et cetera. Look at Macron just as is one example. Bring that over to America, where it seems like we have almost an executive political party. Obviously, with President Trump, we do. He controls the whole thing. I don't think I'm editorializing there. But when did this start, where we have from Clinton to Obama to Biden, where 6 people in a room are telling a party what to do?
Well, I think you got a situation on populism where things have certainly been simmering or worse over the past decade throughout the West, the broader West. And I think there's a frustration among sort of rank and file regular people about the direction of travel, and partially that there's no direction of travel. That what ends up happening is that purists on both sides continue to war with each other at the expense of actually solving problems and moving things forward. And as a result, what you get is perception to reality about the stratification of how economics works, and how prices pull on people, how dissatisfied people feel about their ability to participate, all those things. And that's coming to a head in a lot of ways.
I want to get one more question here. Paul's got like 6 questions. He's looking at me like, let's go, let's go, let's go. Is there a center for President Biden or Vice President Harris to move to, or are they wedded to the left of the Democratic Party?
They're wedded to the left of the Democratic Party on policy. You've certainly seen that. I was sounding the alarm on that back in for markets back in 2019, 2020, because it was apparent that that Biden wanted to run as a centrist, but actually not be a centrist. Can they move to the center? Yeah, but what you've seen in the last few days is the harvesting of more politics of outrage than anything else. I mean, kind of calling the legitimacy of other American institutions into question as a means of stoking your base. So that calculation means a couple of things. One, they think that's how they can win. Secondly, their base is weak. If your base doesn't need a whole lot of stoking if it's foursquare behind you. So they think their base is in danger of fleeing, and that's the bad news. Good news for them is the base certainly isn't going to flee to Trump, and so you've got a lot of people out there, a lot of voters out there, wondering right now just where it is they can go, but they are recapturable, I think.
Terry, given that backdrop, what do you expect to hear from former President Trump and the Republican base here over the next several days, weeks, and months?
Well, I think it'll be more of the same. I mean, by talking so much about Biden, I don't mean to exempt Trump from all this. There's a lot of shame and bad behavior to go around in both parties. But what I expect is that Trump will do everything possible, frankly, to not only keep his own base simmering, and we've all talked in the past about how weak that base is, and but I think he shores up his base. He tries his best to move towards independence, and he tries to make sure that, frankly, that industry and Wall Street are with him. So the vice presidential pick in that regard is going to be crucial to see if he can actually reunify the party and start appealing to independence.
Paul, get one more in here.
So, I mean, again, I kind of feel like the Trump base is what it is. We've seen it time and time again. It's very, very strong. How does former President Trump appeal to non-base moderates, centrists, if you will?
Well, it's interesting, Paul. There's a lot of talk about the Trump base, but it is no bigger, I mean, demonstrably so from primaries, no bigger than it was in 2020. The vote total, I'll give you one example. The vote total in New Hampshire in 2020 for Trump was the same as the vote total in 2024 for Trump. And, Trump had a contested primary in 2024. So you've got that issue. But how they appeal, frankly, I think depends an awful lot on the vice presidential pick, because that's how they're going to have to try to grow the party. Trump did that in 2020 in a better way than most people anticipated when he selected Mike Pence. But he's got a similar kind of job to try to build a bigger tent this time out.
Terry Haynes, thank you for the huge effort. Mr. Haynes is in London advising and such on the United Kingdom elections, and we get him on short notice here. I'm truly into an historic 4th of July and weekend for the United States, the colonies, the United States of America. Red and green on the screen with our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. President Biden will give his first post-debate interview Friday. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre is saying the president had a bad night last weekend, a cold, but is fit to serve in the Oval Office.
He is someone who knows how to get back up once you've been knocked down. That is something that he understands very, very well. And I think, and we believe, that's something that many of Americans across the country understand as well.
Biden also blamed jet lag for the disastrous debate performance. Meanwhile, according to a Reuters report, Vice President Kamala Harris is the top alternative if Joe Biden decides to end his election campaign. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskiy said Donald Trump should come forward with his plan to quickly end the war with Russia, warning that any proposal must avoid violating the nation's sovereignty. Zelensky said in a Bloomberg TV interview in Kyiv today, if Trump knows how to finish this war, he should tell us today. Hurricane Beryl is rowing across the Caribbean Sea as a powerful Category 4 storm on a path toward Jamaica and the Cayman Islands. At least 6 people have died after Beryl slammed islands in the southeast Caribbean. Jamaican Prime Minister Andrew Holness spoke to the country last night.
There are many Jamaicans praying right now. Please continue to lift up Jamaica in prayers.
Bloomberg meteorologist Rob Carolyn has the latest on Beryl.
Beryl was still a very dangerous hurricane with winds of 145 miles an hour, moving to the west-northwest at 20 miles an hour. It's now about 185 miles to the east-southeast of Kingston, Jamaica. It is expected to affect Jamaica today. That's why a hurricane warning is in effect for the entire island. They're going to see 6 to 12 inches of rain. They're going to see sustained winds over 100 miles an hour and likely see gusts over 130 miles an hour. I'm Rob Carolyn, Bloomberg Radio.
Thank you very much, Rob. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it. With Bloomberg News Now, I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
It is wedded in our memories. I mean, Lisa's too young to remember this, but there were 2 newscasts. There was Huntley Brinkley, and there was Walter Cronkite. I grew up in an NBC Huntley Brinkley house. Everybody used a different house than that. When you look at Paramount, and I'm completely confused. We're efforting Mario Gabelli. We'll see if we can get him. But, Paul, what is the venerable network of Margaret Brennan worth?
It's a fraction of what it was even 5 or 10 years ago, and that's simply because of cord cutting. The distribution of
they
this
don't
content.
have cable, like they don't have CNN or MSNBC or Fox.
They do. They have MTV. They have
Yeah, but they don't have news.
No, well, they have the CBS television network, and again, for the longest time, the most watched network, and of course CBS News heritage. But again, the value of that is just a fraction of what it.
And at this moment on this weekend, we're going to quantify what's. We're going to quantify what that is. It could be under $1 billion.
We'll have to, for CBS, certainly, yeah, possibly. So we'll have to see how it all plays out.
Absolutely unreal.
Yep.
We'll have to see, folks. Just unreal. Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We have little movement in futures. This ahead of a ton of economic data out today. We've already received some insight on the housing market. U.S. mortgage rates climbed back above 7% last week. That's according to the Mortgage Bankers Association. It's also driving a drop in applications to finance home purchases. Then you have Challengers Gray and Christmas reported 48,786 job cuts announcements in June, the fewest monthly job cuts since December. Right now, we have the NASDAQ futures, little change, down about 12 points at 20,243. Dow futures, little change, up 27 points at 39,715. S&P futures, little change, down about a point at 5,567. The two-year yield, 4.77%. That's up 2 basis points. The yield on the 10-year, 4.44%, and that is little change. To energy, we go to shares of Permian Resources, up nearly 0.5%. The oil and gas company, well, it was upgraded to outperform at BMO Capital Markets. And then we want to check back in with shares of Paramount. We've been talking about it. Sources saying Skydance agreed to buy Shari Redstone's National Amusements and merge with Paramount. So those shares are higher this morning. And as the tourism industry, we've been talking about it, struggles with rising costs, weaker consumer spending. Well, news that Thailand, it could end a 52-year-old ban on afternoon alcohol sales to attract more customers. Yeah, I didn't know they had a ban.
I didn't know they had one either.
So there you go. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
The things you learn on Bloomberg Surveillance is
Exactly.
too much. Okay, Paul, I'm going down the Garden State Parkway, and I hit Route 37 out to Seaside Heights.
Oh, boy.
And the road's all shut down.
Yeah.
I mean, if these aren't tunnels, this is like a 4 or 6 lane highway.
Yeah, big problem yesterday on the Parkway going south, which is a challenge in and of itself on a summer day. But yeah, so they got to get their act together. But I'll be taking New Jersey Transit today, so I'm not worried.
Are you taking? You're not taking the ferry today?
No,
You're
I'll
doing that on Friday.
I'll do the train.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we'll see. We got a huge newspaper segment. Let's get right to it.
Yeah.
Now, a look at the front pages. What's making news around the world? Your daily roundup of today's headlines from major publications.
And it is the front page. It's your daily look at the front page. It's the Lisa Mateo Hour, brought to you by Interactive Brokers Bond Marketplace. Access their vast selection of over 1 million global fixed income securities, no markups, no built-in spreads, and low transparent commissions. Learn more at ibkr.com/bonds. Lisa, what do you have?
Well, we were just talking about New Jersey, so let's continue the conversation. Global warming showing effects, but a new study says New Jersey heating up faster than any other state in the Northeast. Really? Yes. Okay, so this is a study from Climate Central. They say average annual temperatures nationwide increased by about 2.5 degrees since 1970, but annual temperatures in New Jersey increased by about 3.5 degrees. So it makes this the third fastest warming state in the country. It's just behind Delaware and Alaska. Alaska came in at number 1.
Okay, I didn't see that. All I know is, when
is this because it's asphalted from sea to
shining sea? I think
Delaware
so.
River?
But Tom, whenever in the Metro New York City area, folks, whenever we have these heat waves, the hottest temperature in the Metro New York area is always Newark. And I don't know why that is, but
it's that whole heat island effect.
I guess.
I mean, it's a different things, a warming ocean, overdevelopment, because Newark is very overdeveloped. But you're saying the water temperatures are cold.
Cold, and they better warm up quick.
Have you seen a June report yet? I haven't seen a summary of June in our area, or frankly any other area.
No,
it's too early. I think.
No.
Next,
right.
What do you got?
Okay, we've heard about students using AI for their papers, for different things in schools.
I would never have done that.
Now,
this portion of Bloomberg Surveillance brought to you by Cliff Notes.
Yes,
use them and use them often.
I used to use them. Okay, but now the teachers are using AI to grade the students' papers, but not everyone's happy about it. And here's the problem. So the bots generate this numeric score, and they offer up some critiques. So it's up to the teacher whether they want to use these critiques or develop their own, kind of just use that as a guide. They always tell the parents and students when they use this program, but the problem is they're saying it's making their lives easier. It's helping the students be better writers. But then you have the critics who say, hey, you know what? I can't trust this new technology. My kids are dependent on these grades to go to good college. So So it's this back and forth and this battle over whether the teachers should use AI to grade papers or should not.
Well, here's interesting. All right, from the story, used properly, teachers say,
Yeah.
AI helpers can provide consistency and remove bias
Right.
from assessments of students' work, although not everyone
True
trusts
story.
AI to do that.
I'm at a world-famous prep school, sitting in the office with the head of the mathematics department, who's acclaimed within education. And she was in tears because they kept giving out B's and C's. And all the other schools were giving out A's, grade inflation and all that. And it demonstrably affected where those kids went to school, because they were like old school, like Paul and I grew up with. You got a quality C. I full disclosure, folks, it was a miracle I got through school. I mean, and we can't say it on radio, but there I was. I'm sorry, I have real trouble with this. I just go to the Cliff Notes. I mean, I lived off them.
Exactly.
The yellow and black book.
Yes.
Thank you. Oh, you know, Lisa.
For
Next.
Shakespeare.
For Shakespeare.
For Shakespeare, because I couldn't read all the notes at the bottom. I mean,
Oh, come on. William Faulkner, James Joyce. James Joyce actually read the whole Cliff Notes. Next.
Okay. Home affordability in the U.S. sinking to the lowest point since 2007. Okay, this is from Adam. The cost of a typical home, you think mortgage, insurance, taxes, now consume just over 35% of the average wage. Different things. You have growth in expenses, higher mortgage rates. They've outpaced those income gains. So they're saying the shortage of listings pushed those home prices to a median of about $360,000. So you're talking about home affordability and how it's so much more difficult now. The biggest declines in affordability were in the West and in the Northeast. So places like California, then you have in New York, Brooklyn, Nassau County. So those are some of the markets.
But I mean, we're living with this. I mean, is there any theory that this goes away?
I think interest rates just have to come down. And so the question I have for the real estate people is, what's the rate, the interest rate, the mortgage rate that'll start clearing the market?
The optimal rate.
Yeah, is it 6%? Is it 5%? Where sellers will say, okay, I'll put my house on the market because I'm willing to take a new mortgage for a new property and get this whole thing going. So I don't know.
Next.
Yeah, and then you have the Mortgage Bankers Association, 7.03. That's the 30-year.
Okay, that's still too high.
Yeah, you're still doing all right there. Okay, we talked about this yesterday. Kevin Costner's movie Horizon,
It's working out.
and how much money he needs to gain from this in order to get his money back. Okay, so this is from Business Insider. It only pulled in $11 million its opening weekend. So he was really behind this. He mortgaged his property in Santa Barbara, invested $38 million of his own money. Other undisclosed financial backers also covering the marketing. Variety says that estimates about $30 million. So what they did is they crunched the numbers, and they said for every $10 million Horizon makes at the box office, Costner and his investors see about $4.6 million back, because Warner Brothers is only taking about 8% of that. That means he has to recoup that $30 million that he invested in marketing. It has to make more than $65 million domestically, but he's only made 11, so he's kind of got
But here's the thing.
a long way
This
to go.
is the underbelly of theatrical releases. Pre-sales around the globe. So what you do is you go to Cannes, France, which Tom knows exclusively. He gets his rosé. But people are actually working there, and Costner goes there and he sells the rights to every single country, region around the world, and we don't know what that number was. So that number all goes into his pocket and his investors' pockets. And that might cover.
Or if he goes to streaming too, that could, you know, if it gets a good streaming.
I got to move on to another thing, but has this thing had good reviews? I mean, are the critics?
I think it's okay. I think it's okay, but it's
3
3 hours. Right.
Is it like Dancing with Wolves Redux, or
I mean,
maybe, but I like a good Western. We don't get good Westerns very often.
How
So
the Westerns
I'm gonna give this one a
but
chance.
how does American Westerns
Paul,
play globally?
we got
historically they've done pretty well.
Yeah.
We got a huge response yesterday.
Yep.
To the fact Lisa has 3 freezers.
I know.
Really?
I looked at what the electricity bill is. So you're popping $210 a year just for the base electricity.
She's got a
on
big
those
solar
three.
But
panels.
see, I just blame it on the kids for leaving the lights on. So.
And one guy said to me, "Do you have like spanking new energy efficient freezers, or are these from just these Frigidaires from the '50s?"
They're not. And it's probably, I wonder if I make up for the difference in the money that I save at Costco to fill it.
Hey, it's 4th of July weekend. We're doing American songs. We're doing this for those that have Jenny Cream Ale on 4th of July weekend. And they're at Ronnie's Suburban, and it's midnight. There's only one song to play.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Apple's still minting more money than God, right?
Geopolitics front and center for global Wall Street.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Stocks are coming off of another record high.
And Michael Barr with news.
U.S. Secretary of State discussed the conflict in Gaza.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Paul Sweeney, Tom Keene, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo's here. It's Wednesday. We will be here Friday for the jobs report, 8:30, Paul. At 8:35, even Lachmanachathan is walking out the door at 8:35 on Friday.
That's all right. We'll be here. We'll preview.
We'll be here.
We'll
and
break
we'll
it down.
follow up to it. And, of course, so much going on politically. Can we say thank you, Terry Haynes?
Oh, yeah, that was great.
Out of Claridge's.
Yep.
He's got
it
a
was tea time. We
Claridge's,
interrupted tea time. I mean, but so we appreciate that.
You know, the king called him up and said, please come over and brief me because it's total chaos. We've got a British election tomorrow, a French election Sunday.
Yep.
And then I don't know about our election. Maybe it's November 5th. We'll see. We got the markets. Thank you, Kit Jukes. We just featured Euro Yen 174.20. One of the tensions out there, OMG, the NASDAQ is not green on the screen.
No, exactly. We're down 8 points on the NASDAQ.
Should we sell Rich Truman right now?
Yeah, go ahead. He actually was.
We got a 1 hour program. Gene Munster, Dan Ives. If you are in cash, if you're scared, if you don't agree with NVIDIA, must listen. We'll give you all the time set on that. We're going to feature it on Single Best Idea as well. Dan Ives and Gene Munster together.
I've got the times. I got
on
the
technology.
Times. Tonight, 6 p.m. Tomorrow, 5 a.m., 10 a.m., and 3 p.m. So if you don't have a good feel for what AI is and what the investment implications are, you got to listen.
And from a pro standpoint, if you don't agree with Ives and Munster's optimism, even more reason to listen to that. It's a high point of the weekend. Let's get right to it right now. From the Interactive Broker Studios, the Bloomberg Business Flash, Lisa Mateo.
You got it in futures, little change, but set to open at record levels. This is ahead of a busy day for economic data. It looks like they're trying to jam it all in before the 4th of July holiday. Today we get jobless claims for last week, trade deficit in goods and services, durable goods orders, data on America's service providers. And yes, you can't forget the Fed also issuing minutes from June's meeting on interest rates. Yesterday, Chair Jay Powell said officials, well, they aren't sure inflation is whipped. We have NASDAQ futures down about a point, but at 20,254. Dow futures up 32 points at 39,720. S&P futures up about half a point at 5,569. The 2-year yield 4.77%, up 2 basis points. The yield on the 10-year 4.43%, and that is little change. Shares of Paramount even higher, up 13% now. Sources saying Skydance Media reached that preliminary deal to buy National Amusements, merge with Paramount. Then you have Southwest Airlines. Their shares little change. The company said it's adopted a rights plan, and this is after Elliott Investment Management built that stake in the company. And finally, Alaska Air down nearly 1%. Its union says its flight attendants, well, they're set to receive an average pay increase of 32%. It's part of a new, quote, record contract with the carrier. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. Destination travel here. Now is with our surveillance. We wish we were him correspondent. Lachmanachathan joins us from Equity, and we're going to get to the job market and all that, where he's published some really important stuff. Shogun. The guy's out there on the horse, and he's got his hand out, and there's a bird on his hand that could claw his eyes out. And there's all the symbolism, and the bird flew up the air. You just got back from Scotland, where you did this falconry.
No, you golf in Scotland.
Yeah, you could do this. People have been doing this for thousands of years.
At a Glen Eagle, and it's like freshly scrubbed people, and they're doing. What is it like to have one of those birds on your hand?
On your arm. You have to kind of have your thumb up, higher than your eyeball. Otherwise, they'll crawl up your arm.
Oh, really?
So there's a little bit of a workout. Pro tip. But the bird kind of eyes you, but it's not that interested in you. It's very interested in what it's going to do and get fed. And they're incredibly beautiful, nice creatures. They're amazing, very symbiotic with humans hunting.
And so, just to finish the loop here, Henry Paulson, who didn't show up and just gave one check to birding in America, he basically built the philanthropy of the Hawks in Central Park. I mean, Hank Paulson did it. There's no other way to put it. How do you look now at the Hawks of Central Park after doing this.
I looked at them very admirably before, and I do now too.
And you got your thumb up.
And I got my thumb up. The little kids even did it. They did it really well, our kids. And the other thing, and I think this is generally true, owls with those big eyes, they actually don't see that well. Isn't that amazing?
Okay.
I'll go with that.
This is so cool.
I'm learning all these things about animals.
I will put this out, folks. I will put this out on Twitter and LinkedIn, what Mr. Achuthan has done here. Wonderful trip to Scotland. How's the wonderful trip of the American labor economy? What do you glean at Economic Cycle Research Institute?
Well, steady as she goes, although under the surface, it's quite a mixed bag. We've been talking over the last several months about the global industrial upturn. A key underpin of that is China, which is finally gearing. And in that global industrial upturn, all manufacturing floors in all these different economies around the world are getting a bid. And that includes the United States. So our forward-looking indicators on manufacturing employment have some nice traction. Now, this is not the bellwether of U.S. employment growth. However, it's important. It's cyclical. It has bigger swings than other parts of the economy in terms of jobs creation. And the other thing to keep in mind is that this massive jobs engine, which is in healthcare and education and non-discretionary spending, that stuff is just motoring along. So while it's not accelerating, it's hanging in there, the big engine of jobs growth. And meanwhile, the cyclical part has got a little bit of traction. And I think on balance, it's steady as she goes.
So this U.S. economy, we're going to get the employment numbers on Friday. Tom and I and Lisa, we will be here. Where are we in the U.S. labor market here? It seems still solid to me, but I know there's some concerns out there.
Well, there's definitely concerns out there, and I think they're understandable. We were talking during the break about the K-shaped economy. So if you're working for a wage, you're getting and you're living off of a wage, an hourly wage, you're getting squeezed. If you have assets, you're doing fine. Thank you, right? It's really apparent. There's this survey, and I just want to read this to everybody because it's so striking, and it speaks to the K-shaped economy. 55% of Americans believe the economy is shrinking and in recession. 49% think stock prices are down for the year. You just reported that we're 8 points off of the high, right? And 49% believe that unemployment is at a 50-year high. So that's the have-nots. They are feeling like it's a recession. And there's some Fed research on this too, where periods of high inflation undermine real earnings growth more than a mild recession. And that's why so many consumers feel the inflation's hitting their purchasing power, and it's a condition that people associate with recession. You were just talking anecdotally just a moment ago about housing affordability. You can't afford it unless you've got a lot of stocks and you can cash them in and buy a house.
Let's switch gears to, I'm looking at your most recent note here, talking about China. You say it's favorable prospects for Chinese growth. I thought Chinese economy was, not doing well, the property issue, and we here in the West, we need to pay attention to China. Tell us about what you think's going on there.
So, look, this is the difference between being able to parse structural issues, which are real, they're not going away, and to your point, housing, this huge debt bubble on the housing sector is crushing China longer term and really souring their consumers ultimately. On the other hand, there's a cyclical, looking over the next few quarters, upturn, which is associated with global industrial growth, upturn. So they're gearing on manufacturing, they're gearing on exports, and that is spreading out to other aspects of the economy there.
We're honored to have you here because you know the game where you can be right, and I'm sure at Equity you've been wrong from time to time or off the mark. A single headline out, and for all of global Wall Street, J.P. Morgan chief market strategist Kolanovic to depart from firm.
Saw that. Wow.
So it's a huge headline. This is a guy who has said the market's not going up, He's had an opinion and a belief. Lakshman Achathan, honored to have you here.
Thank you.
It's a tough business, isn't it? I mean, everybody gets it wrong. How do you change your mind when you're wrong? Julian Emmanuel was here yesterday with Ed Hyman at Evercore ISI. They had a cautious view, and they said, wait, there is an America. They probably read Eckery. They said, we gotta go long. How do you change your mind when you're wrong in the strategy game?
Well, look, we have a bona fide objective system. We have a large array of leading indexes. That's why I'm in here talking about China. I'm looking at 100 leading indexes around the world, and when I see one popping off, I have to pay attention. And when I mean popping off, there's a 3 Ps, a pronounced, pervasive, and persistent shift in the vector of the leading index. And when that happens, it's not about what I feel or my gut. It's about what are these objective indicators telling you? And I then have to figure out that story, and I'm coming here and sharing it with you. I'm trying to explain how can housing affordability be so in the tank and the economy hold up? And this is what the indicators are telling us. This is the story they're telling us. I think the manufacturing component has a bid. I think the surprise later this summer is that goods inflation comes back.
Right.
All right.
Okay.
Very good.
There you go.
Thank you. Lakshman Achathan, thank you so much.
To be continued.
Greatly appreciate that. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom Paul. Lisa, President Biden is meeting with the Democratic governors this evening and sitting down for an ABC News interview on Friday to try to reclaim the narrative after last week's debate collapse. The president is blaming his overseas travel for his rocky performance, but at least one House Democrat is now on the record calling for Biden to step aside. Bloomberg Government's Jonathan Tamari has more on the panic within the party.
It's high, and it's, as a couple of House Democrats described to me, very wide, and that they say that it is reaching to all corners of the party, ideologically, geographically, people in swing seats, people in safe seats.
John Tamari covers Congress for Bloomberg Government. And now Reuters is reporting if Biden were to step aside, Vice President Kamala Harris would be the Democrats' top alternative. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskiy is challenging former President Donald Trump to present his plan to bring a quick end to Russia's war with Ukraine. Zelensky sat for a nearly hour-long interview with Bloomberg Television in Kyiv.
To finish war fast. Tomorrow, do we want the war to be over tomorrow? We didn't the war even to start. It was Putin who started it. But I hope you agree that it would be fair. If Trump knows how to end this war, he should tell us today.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskiy spoke through an interpreter. Finally, voters in the UK are set to cast ballots in a national election tomorrow. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Michael Barr, thank you so much. I'm going to keep the names out of it, but I remember, Paul, other great strategists who've resigned. It's always a change. It's tough. And, trust me, folks, there's times where I've been really, really wrong. So I really, think about it. But here's a guy in the bright, bright lights. At a major bank, Paul, where there's different views in the major bank. Talk about that.
Right. And where the pressure comes is from the sales force. The sales force simply says, I can't pick up the phone and make another one of these calls when it appears that it's completely wrong and it's been wrong for a long time.
Right.
That's where the pressure comes from.
And also they can cut the other way, where the sales force says, keep this guy. We love him.
Yeah.
From New York City, stay with us. Bloomberg Surveillance.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures, little movement this morning on a holiday shortened week, but we have a ton of economic data. We have some more employment information coming in. This one from ADP, June private employment rises 150,000. That's lower than the 165,000 that was expected. So we have NASDAQ futures, like we said, little change, down about 17 points, but at 20,237. Dow futures down about a point at 39,687. S&P futures down 4 points at 5,564. We have the 2-year yield at 4.76%. That's up 2 basis points. The yield on the 10-year 4.43%, and that is little change. Spot gold higher, $2,345 an ounce. Brent crude, $86 a barrel. We have WTI crude, $82 a barrel. A few companies making news. It's Apple. Sources saying the company is going to get an observer role on OpenAI's board. Their shares down about 0.2%. And then you have Japanese tech investor SoftBank closed at a record high thanks to a global surge in AI and chip investment. Their ADRs up about 2%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
A little confusion there, Lisa. Thanks so much. ADP out a little bit light, even with a revision. A little bit light. And Paul, in 12 minutes, we get claims because there's no Thursday because of 4th of July. So it's a plethora of data here.
Yeah, we're going to get some data on initial jobless claims. That number, widely watched, 235,000. That would be kind of in line with what we said.
A higher
last
number
month.
would be more angst.
Yep, exactly.
More angst, like 240, 250 would. There's a little bit of a move to the market, but I think they're all waiting for claims here. We'll give that to you in 11 minutes. Really anticipating this. Jamie Rush joins right now, Chief European Economist. Bloomberg Economics. The world has turned upside down. Jamie, where are we on Monday? After the United Kingdom, after France, where are you within European economics Monday morning?
Well, we're doing the splits, aren't we? We've got a shift to the left, a shift to the right, different reasons, different countries, quite a bit of fresh political uncertainty. I think what is pretty clear is that the scope for change in the UK is relatively low, in the sense that there isn't a huge difference between what the two main parties are offering. And so even though Labour are likely to have a landslide victory, they're not going to be tearing up the economic outlook very much. And indeed, we haven't even changed our forecasts. France is a different picture altogether. If we wake up on Monday with an absolute majority for Le Pen's National Rally Party, the picture is going to be quite different. They want to spend big. They want to fight the EU. They want to cut migration. It's a very different vision of France from Macron.
So, Jamie, can you give our listeners and our viewers a sense of how important the French economy is to the European Union?
Yes, it's the second biggest economy. It's the number one debtor in Europe. There's issues more debt than Italy. And Macron has been a central figure for the leadership of the EU. It's been his initiative that has kind of driven the EU reform process forward. So it'd be a major change. I mean, Macron is going to emerge from this a very weakened figure. Just how weakened, we'll find out on Sunday night.
I mean, Jamie, this is a really important thing, the distinction here between a traditional European austerity versus the growth optimism of Mr. Macron. If Le Pen wins, if the right wins in France, majority or not majority, whatever, can France maintain their non-German, non-austerity?
Well, so France is a kind of a major challenge to the EU's new fiscal rules. The EU wants all countries to start tightening the belts now that the pandemic's behind us and that the energy crisis is over. It's now time to start screwing away some money, and that isn't happening. It's not happening in France. They're planning to spend a little bit less over coming years, but not really, not enough. And they've already been scolded by the EU for not doing enough. Now, conversely, if Le Pen wins, she wants to spend about 2% of GDP, so she wants to widen the budget deficit, not narrow it.
So she wants to go to less austerity than Macron.
Yeah. Yep, she wants to cut. She wants to cut VAT. She wants to cut energy costs. It's populist policies. It's not something that would deliver a meaningful long-term boost to the economy. And indeed, if she tried to spend that money, then we'd expect a bond market sell-off higher borrowing costs and therefore a squeeze on the economy. So something more Liz Truss-esque, if you will.
And we know how that worked out.
Yeah, that worked out
yeah,
well.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, Jamie, it was just a couple of months ago when France hosted a bunch of global business leaders, including, some of the global Wall Street leaders to France, saying basically invest in France. How do you think global corporations think about investing in France?
Well, I think you can draw a parallel here with the UK. So if you remember, before the Brexit vote, the UK seemed like a relatively stable place. And I think it's very hard it's hard to understand how corrosive it's been to have the political uncertainty that we've had over the past few years. And so this is what France can look forward to if there is this sort of policy paralysis, because the most likely outcome here is we get a hung parliament, so there is no policy. There's no impetus to reform, no stability, and these things are not good for investment. And so, the UK saw business investment fall relative to OECD peers. France will probably see something similar.
What do you see in central bank policy into the summer? I mean, we don't have time here for a long, drawn-out discussion, but Jamie Rush, when you look, everybody's at Sintra, okay? Everybody's at Sintra pontificating. Where are we going to be Labor Day after Sintra in Portugal?
Well, I mean, we've had some rubbish inflation data for the Eurozone. Services still going ahead at 4%, 4.1%. The ECB is not going to be cutting in July. So the best we can hope for is a cut in September, and I'd say actually that's becoming less assured. If we start to see this inflation persistence really continue, we could be looking at much later in the year for the next cut.
Jamie, thank you so much for the brief. Jamie Rush, our chief European correspondent, and of course, stay with Bloomberg, really on the watch. We're in holiday mode in the U.S. They're not in Europe. It's going to be an extraordinary 4 days for Bloomberg News, out of our London office, Queen Victoria Street, out of Paris, Rue Scribe, with all of our people looking at the United Kingdom and French elections, the ramifications, what it means for the United States. I said there, I put it on Twitter, there's a video out of the EU that actually explains what they're doing in France, where if you're in a district and there's 3 people left, you negotiate to have one of them drop out.
Okay.
So there's only 2 people left to make the election more like the United States.
Ah.
I think what I just said there was accurate, but
I mean, Jamie Rush, he kind of said, if we get a hung parliament there, then really, like here in the United States, when you get a split Congress, nothing really gets done, and you kind of get status quo. And maybe for the markets, that's not a terrible thing.
I didn't realize we have Dan Ives this morning.
Yeah, I saw him in his...
Well, his entourage came through.
Yeah, exactly.
I didn't see him, but I saw 3 or 4 people.
Right.
He's got the guy trailing folks with a microphone boom.
Yep.
They're taping it, I think, for Netflix or something.
Yep. His continued bullishness on Tesla has been rewarded because that stock has come back from, had been selling off,
Can it
selling
break
off,
through
selling
to a new
off.
regime? He says so, right?
Yeah. So, it had been down like 30% year to date. Now it's down about 7% year to date. So it's kind of rallied here. Recently, it's up about 2% pre-market trading today. But market cap $737 billion.
And he's got a big announcement here in Apple. He's gone up to $275 today, this morning, July 3rd.
Well, here's the news on Apple, Tom. I am going to get a new Apple iPhone when it comes out in September.
Wow.
First upgrade.
Lisa?
Put that into your headlines.
Lisa?
Yeah, I am definitely not.
I've got the iPhone 11.
So what happens when you have 3 freezers?
Oh my God, does yours flip? I mean, jeez. I'll take you with me. We'll get like a 2 for 1.
The last time around, I still owed money, so I didn't get an upgrade.
Okay.
And I think this time around, I'm free and clear, so I guess I will get an upgrade.
I think so. Anurag Rana is my personal iPhone consultant. He says buy this new one coming in September.
I want to know why I'm the one with the lowest grade on the family plan.
Yes, exactly.
Everyone else has the upgrade except for me.
Sure.
It's the family plan racket.
Yeah.
I get the love note from my carrier every 30 days. And it's why are we doing this, Lisa?
Because we have no choice
We
in
have
the
no
matter.
choice.
We need the communication.
You look at the checkbook going down as tick-tock, tick-tock, and no pun intended. Stay with us. Dan Ives, Paul will tell you about it. Futures at -4 from New York City, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
In the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures set to open at record levels after the S&P 500 closed above 5,500 for the first time yesterday, hitting its 32nd record year. Right now, S&P futures all at 5,563. We have Dow futures 39,674. NASDAQ futures at 20,228. All right, we have the bond market. The 2-year yield 4.75%. That's up 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year 4.41%, and that's down 2 basis points. More economic data coming out. We'll start with initial jobless claims for last week. The survey was for 235,000, coming in at 238,000. The prior was 233. And we also have trade balance. You can see the difference there. Tom, what do you see? I don't see the market's moving as much as far as the reaction.
Because nobody's working today.
Yeah, before the holiday.
238 with a revision up, and there's a little bit of action there, but we'll leave it at that. We've got the data out, and of course we'll stagger to Friday. Be with us Friday at 8:30 for the jobs report. It's a really important conversation, and the jewel of this is it continues. You will see Gene Munster and Dan Ives together for an hour, a spectacular hour on this moment we're living. I don't bundle the stocks all together. Sweeney does, and you demand we start with Tesla.
Absolutely. Dan Ives joins us here, Managing Director and Senior Equity Analyst at Wedbush Securities. Potentially the worst dressed man on Wall Street. We'll leave that up to the II poll there. Dan, I want to start with Tesla here. Because that stock for a while just could not find a bid. And there's a million reasons why, whether it's fundamentals, people just aren't going to be buying EVs as much as we thought, or is it just Elon Musk? Since kind of late April, that stock's up 60% here, only down about 7% year to date. Give us the latest view on Tesla.
Look, they went through a dark period. I mean, we saw demand soften in China and globally for EVs. Boom came off the rose. They missed deliveries in 1Q. But our whole call was adult in the room, Musk steps up, turns us around, cuts prices. Then the mojo returns. And that's what we saw yesterday. I mean, the 2Q deliveries handily beat Whisper and the Street. And Paul, I believe we're going to a historical period because Robotaxi Day, August 8th, we just raised price target to 300. I could argue FSD and autonomous. Tesla is the most undervalued.
FSD is
full self-driving.
Full self-driving.
Tesla is the most undervalued AI play in the market.
Everything you just said is about automobiles. If we can all agree Toyota is the machine of the world in automobiles, to be charitable, it's trading at 10 times earnings. How do you buy Tesla? Forget about the disasters of America when the best run machine is running at 10 times earnings.
Yeah, I think Tom brings up probably the biggest debatable point in Tesla. I've always viewed Tesla as a disruptive tech company. Never viewed them as an auto company. And I think more and more the software piece, especially when it comes to FSD and autonomous, that is ultimately what's really going to distinguish them more and more going forward. The way that you get to evaluation, trillion, half, 2 trillion Tesla, it's not auto. It's that this is essentially an AI play. It's data driven, and the sum of the parts model starts to play out. That's why I believe this is marks a huge inflection point in the Tesla story. And I think August 8th, look, just like we talked about with Apple going to WWDC with Cook and the AI strategy, this will be a historical moment for the Tesla story.
So what is that event? Explain to us what that event is.
So they're going to basically introduce their autonomous and robotaxi fleet, which essentially is going to lead to, over the coming years, I believe 1 of every 5, 1 of every 6 ride shares at some point.
Which city is going to do what you're talking about? It's not congestion New York.
Look, I think next 3 to 5 years, autonomous is coming. Because in China, it's coming. FSD and autonomous is happening.
It's going to work in Kansas City.
It will work in Kansas City. I say, but put it this way, by the end of the decade, you will have a percent, 5, 10, 15% of what I'll call shared rides that will not have a driver.
Okay. I'm going to switch gears here. Coming out of the pandemic, Apple 60 to 220. You've been dead on this. Extrapolate out the new Apple. You go to 275. hi, I was busting your chops. You can't come on till you go to 300. I want you to extrapolate out 5 years on some of these Mag 7s. People hate you, Dan, because you've been so damn right about this. Extrapolate out the new trend of Apple.
Yeah, and also Gene and I talk in that hour long, which will be tomorrow on Bloomberg Radio. Gene and I talk about this a lot in terms of Apple. Look, the reality is that it's all about install base. So when we look at Apple,
their ecosystem,
2.2 billion iOS devices, 1.5 billion iPhones, and of those, 270 million haven't upgraded in 4+ years in terms of, including Paul, who will probably be online for iPhone 16.
That's what I'm doing.
Now, when you look at Apple introducing Apple Intelligence, essentially the AI strategy, this is going to now be developers building hundreds and hundreds of apps on Apple's ecosystem, including the big players. Eventually Meta and others are going to have to come in as well. They will own, as what we talk about NVIDIA and Godfather of AI, owning enterprise AI, in terms of AI revolution. The consumer AI revolution will go through Apple. And the important thing when it comes to numbers, I could argue now that 100 billion of services, when you trajectory it out, that could be an incremental 40 to 50 billion of services next 5-6 years.
We're going to talk serious here, folks. This is with Wedbush. And with Dan, Dan, you become a phenomenon, and it's an earned excellence. This morning, where Marco Kolvanovic at JP Morgan is pushed aside. You've earned this excellence. So let's talk CFA math right now. What's your run rate on revenue growth at Apple?
Look, my run rate is basically you're going from a 2-3% grower to what's going to be an 8 to 10%
higher single digit
top line grower. Right. But because of the margins on services and what's happening,
which
on
is
the
like 85%,
side,
right?
Now you're actually going to have EBITDA cash flow growing double digits. So when you start to trajectory that out, you're basically going to have what I could say from a cage perspective, the best sort of earnings growth potential that you've had in Apple going back to the last 10 years, which is, in my opinion, on some of the parts, when we talk about 275, 300 are bull case.
What is your sum of the parts on Apple right now?
Some of the parts, 325 to 350 on a bull case, because I believe the services business, which I put a value of 1.4 to 1.5 trillion, could be worth, when we think about AI coming, $2 trillion.
So you have confidence their margins under the stress. Sweeney decides not to buy the new iPhone. I can't buy 6 new iPhones for the brats at home. You're saying the margins are persistent and could even grow?
And they're growing 100 bips a year just based on them producing.
Yeah, but you can't go trees to the sky. When does the set of margins level out?
I believe we have 5 to 7 year run rate on margins. But just going back to the Sweeney example, Sweeney's playing golf down the shore. Everyone else, go back six months from now, everyone has an iPhone 16, iPhone 15. He's like, how do you do that? Oh, you have an iPhone 13. You can't do that on your iPhone.
That's the way Damien is. I mean,
I
know. You got to keep up with
But
Damien.
that's essentially what's going to happen.
iPhone 11 for correction there. Dan, so are you comfortable? Like, I think going into that recent event from Apple, concern in the marketplace was Apple was behind in the AI, zeitgeist. They just weren't there. Sure. Do you think they're there now, or they will get there?
They were late, but they don't have to be first.
Right.
They have to be the best. And when you have an install base like that, and that's what Cook and Cupertino knew, they need to bring OpenAI in, build their LLMs into iPhone 16. And I could tell you from all of our Asia trips, those iPhone numbers in Asia continue to uptick. Street's still not where I believe they're ultimately going to be. You put that together, we are essentially going into an AI-driven super cycle.
Okay, I want to ask you travel like crazy. You're doing all sorts of good things at Wedbush. Great. When you go out worldwide and talk to serious institutional people wearing gray suits and bow ties, do they feel they're under-owned in the Dan Ives world?
That's the reason people meet with me. Because ultimately it's under-owned globally.
And they're scared stiff because you got a waiting. I mean, I look at Will Danoff at Contrafund or others. I guess, particularly with Berkshire Hathaway, they own some of these things like Apple, but that's just a few people, right?
Exactly, and that's why it's under-owned institutionally. I'd say retail to some extent has almost been ahead of institutions when it comes to the revolution. But in my opinion, the AI party, it's 9 p.m., and this party goes to 4 a.m. Now, there are going to be others, like Amazon's like, let me on the dance floor because I want to be part of the AI. Look what's happened to the valuation of Amazon, because AWS, that's going to be a key piece to monetization. That's why I believe a year from now, we're looking at $3-4 trillion market caps. NVIDIA, Apple, Microsoft. First one to get there is Apple.
Can you be sure when you leave that Michael Barr doesn't see you? Because I don't want Michael Barr getting any ideas.
Look,
I mean, those of you on Bloomberg 1130, thank God you're not on YouTube.
Yes, exactly.
Dan Ives, congratulations from the securities analysis standpoint of getting this right. Dan Ives, Gene Munster, an entire hour tonight, 6 p.m. and tomorrow, 5 a.m., 10 a.m., 3 p.m., and we're trying to figure out what to do with it on a podcast. For any of you studying for the CFA worldwide, trying to understand what Michael Mauboussin talks about of capital allocation and capital efficiency, this is the hour of the summer. Bloomberg Daybreak, Dan Ives, Gene Munster, look for that. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom. Paul, Lisa. President Joe Biden blamed travel plans that took him to France and Italy in the weeks ahead of his disastrous debate against Donald Trump for his poor performance on stage. Biden is seeking to explain a moment as he looks to calm a revolt in his own party. Democratic Representative Marie Gluesenkamp of Portland, Washington, said she is now convinced that Biden is going to lose to Trump in November.
About 50 million Americans tuned in and watched that debate. I was one of them for about 5 very painful minutes. And we all saw what we saw.
Representative Gluesenkamp spoke to KATU television. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskiy said Donald Trump should come forward with his plan to quickly end the war with Russia. Zelensky said today in a Bloomberg TV interview in Kyiv, if Trump knows how to finish this war, he should tell us today.
If there are risks to Ukraine's independence, if there are risks that we will lose the statehood, we want to be prepared for this. We want to understand whether in November we will have the powerful support of the US or we'll be all alone.
Speaking through an interpreter, Zelensky said he's willing to meet with Trump in person to hear his proposals. Hurricane Beryl roars toward Jamaica after killing at least 6 people in the southeast Caribbean. Bloomberg meteorologist Rob Carolyn has the latest on Beryl.
As of 8 a.m. this morning, Hurricane Beryl was located less than 125 miles to the southeast of Kingston, Jamaica, moving west-northwest at 20 miles an hour. Winds are still sustained at 145 miles an hour, making it a strong Category 4 hurricane. We are seeing the central pressure coming up. It's now 952 millibars. Hopefully the system will weaken a little bit more before it gets to Jamaica, but it is certainly going to be causing some damage. Winds sustained over 100 miles an hour, likely across much of Jamaica, as well as 6 to 12 inches of rain. I'm Rob Carolyn, Bloomberg Radio.
Thank you, Rob. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. Paul, my takeaway from this conversation, your conversation on Tesla and on Apple, is we're all coming to grips with Graham, Dodd, and Cottle on railroad stocks. And when I first read Graham, Dodd, and Cottle cover to cover, I knew it was my grandfather's book.
Right.
And so then there's my book, and what Dan Ives is talking about in this tech revolution is something I never did, never understood. The capital allocation here is totally different.
Yeah, it is. And I think what Dan's defined, I think Dan's career is just a fundamental, wholehearted belief in technology and the transformative value of technology. And you just go long tech, long term. And that backs it up. He's got 30 buys and 3 holds of the 33 companies he follows in the tech space. And you know what? By and large, absolutely right.
We don't have time for it. Somebody on YouTube wants to know, does Michael Barr going to get a new phone? That's a mystery. Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
In the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures now edging lower. Traders weighing some fresh labor market readings for clues on the Fed's next steps. You had private payrolls increase 150,000 last month. That's according to ADP Research Institute. Then recurring applications, U.S. jobless benefits rose for a 9th straight week and the longest stretch since 2021. Right now we have NASDAQ futures down about 0.1%, 33 points. Dow futures, little change, down 4 points. S&P futures down 0.1% or 5 points. The 2-year yield, 4.74%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year, 4.41%. That's down 2 basis points. Few companies making news. We'll start with JP Morgan as Chief Global Market Strategist Marko Kolanovic. He's going to leave the firm after 19 years. That's according to a memo that was seen by Bloomberg. And then you have Eli Lilly up 0.2%. It won FDA approval for its new drug to slow Alzheimer's. Those shares of its rival Biogen down about 0.5%. And Sanofi, ADR is up about 1%. Its Dupixent was cleared by EU for patients with chronic lung disorder. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Greatly appreciated. Paul Sweeney and Tom Keene here on a hugely eventful Wednesday. No holiday for the weary. Again, we'll be here Friday. Huge response to our technology show. We'll give you more on that. Look for that tonight and into tomorrow. Gene Munster and Dan Ives on that as well. I think after Dan Ives, a perfect guest joins. Gina Martin Adams, running all of Bloomberg Intelligence. Gina, I go to the FA screen, which is incredibly rich. And if I look at free cash flow, and I look at free cash flow growth, or the quarter-to-quarter, year-to-year growth of free cash flow at a company, tech is different. The Dan Ives world is different. The Gene Munster world is different. Why is it?
Well, part of it, to be honest, is that this is the group that led us out of earnings recession from 2022. So it's different because of the cycle. First and foremost, remember, this tech at large, including tech and telecom and media companies, led the recession down in 2022. They had to cut costs tremendously. They were experiencing much slower growth in revenue than anyone had anticipated coming into that year. They did that. And now they're leading the recovery out of that recession. That's been the case since 2023, where they're getting stronger free cash flow growth. They're also, frankly, paying out much faster. They're redeploying capital at a very rapid pace, in particular, the largest stocks. Now, why the largest stocks? Well, their cash flow, their moats around their operations are extraordinary. And they have very intentionally created a framework where it's very difficult for smaller companies to come in and compete. They are giants, and they very clearly dominate the space.
Are they monopoly?
But I'd say the cycle has favored this group, especially right now, over others, partly because of where they were.
Okay, so I'm going to go Ida Tarbell on you. Are they, you say moats, are they now almost monopsonistic, I would say, in the sense that they command the high ground? Or do you at Bloomberg Intelligence see 50 or 100 other companies that one day could be like Apple?
I think it's very difficult for another company to one day be like Apple, because Apple owns a lot of the companies in the private sector. And this is something we're working on extensively now, is these large companies in tech increasingly own the development of tech all the way through the chain. So we saw this in particular with Microsoft and ChatGPT. Microsoft owns the entities that are developing AI, right? Microsoft has been a key player in that supply chain. Now, NVIDIA came out and is a key beneficiary from the development of what's happening in AI, but ultimately, private sector companies are developing new technologies that the big cash flow dominant companies of the world are able to gobble up and buy and own. So they own the technology. It doesn't mean that another company is not going to come out of nowhere. That is absolutely possible. But will that company ultimately come to the market in the form of its own private entity? Or will it come to the market as a component of Apple or Microsoft or Meta? That's the question now. And lately, they're coming to market as a component of the big guys.
Hey, Gina, as someone who lived through the late 90s and the 2000 meltdown in tech, I push back on the on the narrative that this tech market looks like the late 90s, simply because now these companies, as Tom points out, all the time correctly, that they have real earnings and real cash flow, things like that. But the concentration risk, that looks a lot like the late 90s, and that is not healthy. How do you think about that?
Yeah, it's a great point, Paul, and we've done an extensive amount of work on this over the last several weeks. Really, it's a body of work that we've developed over the last several years, but we've refreshed it recently. And you're absolutely right. Concentration risk is the key difference with the 1990s. Concentration risk is actually worse today than it was in the 1990s. We're more dependent upon these large entities performing well, or if they don't perform well, the result is the S&P 500 flounders. That was not necessarily the case in the 1990s. We saw price appreciation accelerate materially, but sort of the earnings contribution of tech was not what it is today. And today, the index is very dependent upon the earnings of technology to really set the pace and drive the story and drive the narrative. What was so interesting about this year in particular, the first quarter and the second quarter, is this concentration risk only expanded. And it only expanded, frankly, because the earnings contributions of these companies only dominated. We have seen very little earnings growth outside of tech this year specifically. We should see that narrative shift. We should see earnings growth emerge for the rest of the index, but we have not yet seen it. And I think this really leads to what to expect next for stocks. In the next 2 weeks, we will start another earnings season. I know it seems like the last one just ended, but nonetheless, we will start another earnings season. We will hear these narratives come out in the market once again. Can tech satisfy expectations and keep beating expectations is a key question. But more importantly, can the rest of the S&P 500 start to contribute more to earnings growth to ease the burden that is increasingly on the shoulder of these
I got to get this in quickly, Gina Martinez. It's too important. David Costin writes at Goldman Sachs that everybody's ahead of themselves with high single-digit earnings growth. Are we ahead of ourselves on the upcoming earnings season?
I think there are some vulnerabilities in the earnings season coming up, but expectations are not particularly high outside of the tech space. So if you're going to make a call that you're going to miss earnings growth, the call is very narrowly on the idea that tech is going to disappoint. And that's a really difficult call to make. High single-digit earnings growth is pretty normal, particularly considering where we were. The trouble that we're going to face is that tech earnings growth has very clearly peaked. It is decelerating. It's facing tougher comps. And if tech doesn't satisfy expectations, then the earnings season will be considered a failure, without a doubt. So if you're going to make the call that it's going to be a weak earnings season, you have to make the call against tech.
Okay. So, I mean, it feels to me like NVIDIA, NVIDIA has to deliver.
Yeah, very much so. NVIDIA has to deliver. Microsoft has to deliver. Apple has to deliver. Meta and Google have to deliver. The big stocks, 100%, Paul, have to deliver very strong earnings growth and guide positively. Or we're going to have, it'll be a tough few weeks. Now, this is the season where you find the toughness start to emerge. This season and next season, the July season and the October season, are almost always the seasons where we really start to see some degree of weaknesses emerge.
Brilliant. Gina, thank you so much. Dan Ives to Gina Martin Adams. This is the way we roll here at Bloomberg Surveillance. Where were you the day of the bicentennial 1976?
Oof. Washington Crossing State Park for reenactment of the crossing. Fort
Wayne, Indiana, with a Dutch Masters cigar in my mouth.
Really?
I was like 23 or something, you know. I was seeing my grandparents on the bicentennial. We won't ask Lisa, she doesn't remember it. Tom Petty was in a recording studio, and he recorded American Girl.
Wow.
July 4th,
is that
1976.
Right? Classic.
That is so cool. And it's just, you know.
Top 5 song for me.
A great, yes, Dutch Masters, folks. That's the way I roll. Get over it. No Padron, no Olivia. Dutch Masters. We're still smoking. I'm kidding. Anyways, Tom Petty for the bicentennial of a few years back.
is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Why are we upset if we're creating jobs?
Inflation's still a thing out there for the everyday consumer.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
The economic calendar jam-packed today.
And Michael Barr with news.
Tensions between the U.S. and China have heated up even more.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo. We'll be here Friday, 8:30 for the jobs report. We're here Wednesday before a whole set of elections. I guess we can editorialize Macron out in Paris, Sunak out in London, Kolanovic out at J.P. Morgan.
Yeah, J.P. Morgan,
that's what
exactly.
it is.
So there's definitely been some movement there on Global Wall Street. That's a big story. J.P. Morgan, it's one of the biggest seats on the street, Tom. And,
it is. Derivatives at Bear Stearns. And you mentioned it earlier. Did you say 19 years?
Yeah, something.
A whole set of years here at J.P. Morgan. And this happens. He's been extremely and persistently cautious and hasn't budged.
No, he hasn't. And I've seen that in my career a lot, and the pressure on these folks, particularly these strategists, because they really represent the view of the bank. And, if you're the CEO of the bank, you kind of have to, be in line with that. If you're the sales force of the bank, if you're bankers there, you kind of got to be in line with that. And if it's not optimistic or if it's wrong or just against trend, that's a tough place to be.
I mean, we'll have to see what we've got here. On a Wednesday here, we got a lot of economic data. We had claims and ADP as well. Futures at -6, Dow futures at -16, the VIX 12.13. With our Bloomberg Business Flash, Lisa Mateo.
You got it. And we have red on the screen this morning. And this is after data over more signs that the labor market is starting to slow down. You had U.S. companies added workers at a more moderate pace in June. And wage growth, it cooled in private payrolls data from ADP. Then you had recurring claims showing a growing number of people where they're just having a tough time finding a new job. We've got more data on the way, including durable goods orders data on America's service providers. And you can't forget the Fed also issuing minutes of June's meeting on interest rates later today. So NASDAQ futures down about 0.1%, 39 points. We have Dow futures, little change, down 13 points. S&P futures down 0.1% or 7 points. The 2-year yield, 4.74%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year, 4.41%, and that's down 2 basis points. Shares of Paramount still higher, up 13%. The sources say that Skydance Media has reached that preliminary deal to buy National Amusements, merge with Paramount. And then you have Southwest Airlines are up 0.3%. The company said it's adopted a rights plan, and this is after Elliott Investment Management built that stake in the company. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. Paul Sweeney, let's get up to date here on the President of the United States. And I think for everyone it's a blur. Twitter's a mess.
It is.
I mean, I can't even keep track of what's going on there. I take, when like serious journalists are saying breaking or new or scoop, I read it, but the snark factor, both sides and all that within America into this 4th of July is great. You just wonder, after a governor's meeting, I guess he met with the governors, the inner circle of the president and all, what's the next? I mean, where do we go? And all I can think of is Henrietta Tracy or Leslie Van Jamery, I think it was at Chatham House, saying, we're not going to know. It's all going to be secret till it's
I kind of feel the same way, Tom. I'm just not sure where it's going to go. I mean, we haven't seen too many public statements from leading Democrats one way or the other. We did have former President Obama via Twitter/X come out support.
Friday?
That was kind of right there, and so that's certainly important. But I guess it comes down to the donors and others. So we'll see.
An important conversation away from Paris, away from London, in Kyiv. Our Annmarie Hordern with Mr. Zelenskiy.
So let us imagine that the winner might be Trump in November, and he knows how to end the war. He has a plan. Me, as the president of a country at war, not a theoretical person, but a real-life person, I would like to be prepared. We are 40 million. We're a big country, and we really depend on the aid from the world. And we depend on the aid and the position and the stance of the US. So I would like to understand, what would it mean to finish war fast? Tomorrow, do we want the war to be over tomorrow? The war didn't to start. It was Putin who started it. But I hope you agree that it will be fair. If Trump knows how to end this war, he should tell us today. Because if there are risks to Ukraine's independence, if there are risks that we will lose the statehood, we want to be prepared for this. We want to understand whether in November we will have the powerful support of the US or we'll be all alone.
Mr. Zelensky, and through the months and the quarters and the years, we've seen a different Zelensky, it seems, as he adapts to a war. In conversation in Kyiv with Annmarie Hordern, we are thrilled to have Annmarie with us, and particularly the symbolism of being in Kyiv as we go to the 4th of July. There's quite a delay, so we're going to keep these very discreet questions and answers to Annmarie. Annmarie, thank you for being with us. Thank you for your reporting from Kyiv. How is this Zelensky different than the Zelensky of February of a few years ago?
This is a hardened man who was once a comedian, who now is still a wartime president, who's dealing with not just continuing jetting around the world to make sure that he has allies and partners supporting him, which you just heard there. You know, this angst potentially that it's going to be a Donald Trump 2.0, and how does he prepare to that? He told me he's potentially ready to sit down with him if Trump has a plan, like he insinuated he did before during the debate. He wants to see it now because he says the consequences are just existential for Ukraine. And this is an individual, of course, who's still dealing with issues at home. They just changed the mobilization laws. So if you're younger, there's more potential that you are going to be drafted. They have a lot of weapons coming into the country, although he made the point these weapons have been delayed. That is why many in the military analysts would use the word deadlock or stalemate. He does not like that word. But they also need to make sure they have the men to use those weapons. So he has a lot of challenging times ahead of him at home. And while all this is going on, there's seismic shifts in politics in Europe and in the United States.
Annmarie, you over the years have basically been our correspondent on corruption, whether it's Russia or across Europe and, of course, Ukraine as well. The latest news is NATO is more than lukewarm about the continued corruption in Ukraine. From your perspective of years, what is the level of corruption in Ukraine, and what can Zelensky do about it?
Well, Zelensky has been working towards this, and he understands this is a condition and has been a condition for a lot of items that the U.S. went ahead with. I'm thinking the bilateral security agreement, and also right now they are discussing part of that $61 billion, more than $7 billion is a loan tied to Treasury, and there are discussions right now about what corruption reforms, what changes in what potential corruption there's going on in the country that they can make to unlock that $7 billion. So this has not gone unnoticed. A lot of issues tend to happen in customs, with the Customs Department. But if you talk to Ukrainians, one of the issues is they are under martial law. Right now, their only goal is to survive and defeat Putin. Many would say, let's deal with reforms later. But it's a critical issue. Partners bring it up. And it's hard to honestly think that there's no corruption in the government when their head of the Anti-Corruption Bureau was actually, allegedly, in Ukrainian press, leaking to individuals that were corrupt and that they were going to bring before the Bureau. So this is an issue. But I would say right now, under martial law, Zelensky understands it. They want to reform, but he has to do two things at once. Reform, at the same time, try to win a war.
Annmarie, in your discussions with President Zelensky, did he offer any roadmap for any possible resolution to this war at any reasonable time frame?
Well, what he's saying is that everyone, including Viktor Orban, who was here yesterday, who's been a hurdle for Zelensky in the European Union. He came here, it's the first time he's been to Ukraine since the outbreak of the war. He now has a little bit more power because he's holding the rotating EU presidency. He called for a ceasefire, and Zelensky says, yes, but a ceasefire, what does that entail? What is their future steps? Because what they do not want to do is cede any territory to Russia. When I asked more about who could potentially be a mediator in this, it's been floated. You could have a Mohammed bin Zayed or Mohammed bin Salman, someone in the Gulf that has been in the past the links between, say, prisoner swaps between the United States and Russia, a third party that has credibility in both Zelensky and Putin's eyes. But Zelensky said, for real war to end and credibility for a third party, it needs to be the United States and China putting their differences aside and hashing this out.
Annmarie Hordern, thank you so much for your work in Kyiv today. We hope, Annmarie Hordern, by the time you get back, the Yankees maybe can win 2 in a row. Just possibly. We'll have to see on that. Annmarie Hordern in conversation with Mr. Zelensky, important given the politics in New York. Red and green on the screen, the VIX 12.13, the Sweeney yield, the 2-year yield 4.74%. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker urged President Joe Biden to address the nation to explain his strategy and his concerns after his disastrous debate performance against former President Donald Trump. Pritzker told CNN President Biden needs to communicate more. We have not heard a lot from him since the debate, and that's why the polls look as they do. Meanwhile, Democratic Representative Marie Gluesenkamp of Washington State says she is now convinced that Biden cannot beat Trump in November.
Biden is going to lose to Trump. I know that's difficult, but I think the damage has been done by that debate.
Representative Gluesenkamp spoke to Portland, Oregon's KATU TV. Jamaican Prime Minister Andrew Holness last night declared the entire island a disaster area for the next 7 days ahead of Hurricane Beryl. It's expected to weaken a bit, but Holness says that Beryl is expected to make landfall with winds of 120 to 140 miles per hour.
Hurricane Beryl is the earliest Category 5 hurricane on record. It highlights the growing impact of climate change on global weather patterns, particularly on small island developing states like Jamaica.
Earlier, Beryl killed at least 6 people and caused significant damage in the Southeast Caribbean. Last-minute campaigning across Great Britain today. Voting begins tomorrow. Polls predict a Labour landslide victory, booting Conservative Prime Minister Rishi Sunak out of office. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
I could probably go back to the early 60s and remember sitting in the backyard with a bunch of friends looking at a 3-way player trade at MLB where like 15 players were traded. The old days. Michael Barr, one day the whole Detroit Tigers traded everybody but Al Kaline. And I'm looking at the wild card standing into the 4th of July, into the All-Star game, and all but like 4 teams are wild card eligible. I mean, what do you do now? I don't understand.
That's a good question.
The trade deadline in baseball when 20 teams are in the game. I just don't see it.
All of a sudden, the Orioles now are ahead of the Yankees in the standings because the wagon wheels fell off. I'm sorry, Lisa. She gets mad at me every time I bring that up.
It's still a bump in the road, that's all.
Poetry.
By the way, very quickly, Shohei Ohtani, the upcoming All-Star Home Run Derby, he's not going to participate in it.
Good.
It causes injury, right?
Well, it messes up your swing. Some people say.
I agree.
I agree with that.
I agree with that. We'll do more baseball talk. It's getting fun. It's a lot of fun. A lot of teams competing. The Yankees are in second place. It's a beautiful thing. From New York City, red and green on the screen, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
In the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures pretty much treading water right now. We have Nasdaq futures down 0.1%, 32 points. Dow futures little change, up about a point, and we have S&P futures down 0.1% or down about 6 points. We have the 2-year yield at 4.74%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year 4.4%, and that's down 3 basis points. We'll head over to spot gold higher at $2,352 an ounce. Brent crude $86 a barrel. WTI crude at $82 a barrel. Few companies making news. That's Apple. Sources saying the company is going to get an observer role on OpenAI's board. And then you have shares of Constellation Brands. They're up about 2%. It's beer results topped estimates, so more people drinking beer. And another casualty in the retail sector. Bob's Stores permanently shutting down all of its locations after 70 years on July 14th. That is the end. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
I mean, Paul, you shop there weekly, right?
Bob's Discount Furniture, right? That's
big. No, Bob's Stores.
Bob's
That's
Stores,
different.
okay.
That's like the sports
okay,
outfits and things like that. They're having a big sale now, though.
All right.
But there's a lot of retail really struggling. This goes to the K-shaped economy.
Yes, you're right.
Okay, are we making a Costco visit this weekend, Lisa? Can I join?
This weekend, I actually do have to, I know. And I figured if I go now, it'll be good because everybody's away, so maybe it'll be empty and I can have it to myself.
Is it usually like packed, like you have to wait in line to check out and all that?
Yes.
It's like nuts.
You do have to wait.
Even when I take self-checkout more and more now.
You do?
Do you?
Yes.
I'm like, why?
I'm doing it more and more.
If you have a few things. I think if you have too much, it's
right.
just...
No, you're right. You're right.
It's a little bit too much work.
Yep.
We say good morning. Our heads are spinning. There's just so much going on. An incredibly rich news flow. I mean, our basic goal is to get to Monday. To help us out right now, I love talking to Freya Beamish about China. She's an expert. But it's Freya Beamish of T.S. Lombard. They're right near like the coffee, remember the tea houses or coffee houses?
Absolutely. Yep.
Back to like 1750.
Yep.
Freya's great-great-great-great-great-grandfather was here with T.S. Lombard. She's chief economist, head of macro research.
9 Cloak Lane.
Freya, what does the United Kingdom, what does Parliament, what does London look like Monday morning?
London, I'm not sure. Let me talk about the economy. Coffee houses, from my vantage point of the coffee house. Let me pontificate on the economy. I think I'm actually quite optimistic. Maybe I've had too much coffee, but optimistic on the outlook for the UK economy. Not so much for bonds. I'm not expecting there to be any kind of rout. I think this is a sustainable situation, right. But I think that actually. The policy environment of the 2010s was something that was not at all good for the real economy. It was good for bonds, and now I think we're going to see a reversal of that. And I think that actually the parts of the equity market, the UK facing equities, are actually going to do better under a high pressure, by which I mean kind of tight labor market. There's not necessarily as much outsourcing. There's less of a drive towards austerity. That actually the real economy will do better under that. The value will do better under that than in the 2010s.
Freya, what's important to me, and the T.S. Lombard, of course, is the iconic work of Charles Dumas. Do you suggest with the French election, the British election, the turmoil there, that your Europe, your United Kingdom move away from austerity and take on more of the, I'm going to call it Anglo-American model of debt?
Look, everyone is very afraid of the Truss Kwarteng debacle. I think that's actually not very representative of a true growth policy oriented fiscal program. I think that there were a lot of it wasn't really a growth program that Truss and Kwarteng were talking about. And we don't know. There is a lot of blanks to fill in with Labour. I think that's reasonable, given that they've been out of office for a long time. You'd actually hope that they'll spend some time with the civil service, trying to work out how to do things properly. So it's good in a sense that they've got this big kind of list of reviews that they want to undertake. And as an economist, looking at yes, the gaps in that. I can either restrain myself to being a sort of a glorified accountant, or I can kind of get beyond the imposter syndrome that we all have as economists and try to look at the kind of the growth implications of various types of spending, and how Rachel Reeves might actually not move away from the fiscal rules, but to sort of change the culture around the fiscal rules. At the moment in the UK, we have what I would say is quite a backward relationship between putting the cart before the horse between the Office of Budget Responsibility and the Treasury, in which the Treasury is sort of handed fiscal headroom, and they have to work within that, rather than there being an actual growth policy that sort of is the starting place for any kind of debate on the fiscal outlook. So when I look at the kind of the fiscal rules, they do have this very binding constraint of the sort of the 5-year target of the debt ratio supposed to be falling over that time horizon. But when you look at between the lines of for instance, the Mays lecture that Reeves gave, you can start to see her sort of thinking about what's the longer term impact of certain types of investment spending, that she's going to be kind of reporting on that. And my expectation is that over a kind of a 2 to 3 year time horizon, that will actually be quite a good thing for the UK economy. Not so much in the short term. I think the Bank of England has probably over tightened quite significantly, and that we're going to see the downside of that in terms of growth and disinflation in the second half of the year. But looking kind of 2 to 3 years out,
right.
I think it's not difficult to be above consensus, at least.
Hey, Freya, let's go across the channel here to France. How does an economist kind of game out some of the political uncertainty in France, given that it's such a big, it plays such a big role in the EU?
Yeah, it's there's a sort of a short-term how do markets react answer to that, and there's a much bigger question which I'm not really even going to try and tackle as an economist on kind of what are the implications, the geopolitical implications of the shift that we're seeing there. Thinking about the shorter term reaction in markets, I'm not sure that markets have actually got it quite right, in the sense that there was a kind of a relief rally when Rassemblement National underperformed the polls, and that's the sort of the market knee-jerk reaction. You think when politicians aren't able to pander to their every whim, then that's a good thing, and markets will be able to perform well under that scenario, particularly when those politicians have in the past been very extreme in some of their policies. In the current case, though, in the context of Europe, as you're sort of alluding to, it's harder to just go with that normal market reaction, in the sense that if there isn't an outright majority formed, then how is a government going to be fudging along with the European Commission and getting a deal signed under the excessive deficit procedure, which is what the market really needs for that certainty to come through.
I get 15 seconds. So basically, Brussels loses by the time we get to Monday morning?
I think, yeah, in the wider context, there's a lot of uncertainty, of course, with tactical voting. It seems to be moving towards the kind of the third candidates pulling out. But I think if there's a hung parliament, that's actually going to be more of a problem for markets than the recent reactions are actually going to have played out.
Freya Beamish, T.S. Lombard there on the, I guess, not the political economics, the economic politics.
Yes, I think
is
you're
where
right.
we are.
Yeah, trying to get a sense of what it means for the economies as we have some change over in the UK.
I didn't know this. July 4th is just celebrated by the colonies.
Oh, is that right?
I didn't know that.
Okay.
So they'll be working
sense.
Queen Victoria Street.
Exactly.
They'll be working July 4th. And, of course, in France, they'll be doing a typical 3-day work week.
Yeah,
I'm
sure.
kidding.
Just kidding, folks.
But there it is. And, it's going to be really interesting to see where we are Monday morning. And please stay tuned to Bloomberg. All across the arc here from Wednesday. We haven't even mentioned the UK. The U.S., I should say.
Yeah.
Where are we Friday in the U.S.? Where are we Sunday in the U.S.? I don't.
Exactly. I mean, we'll get a view on the economy Friday, certainly with the jobs number, but then we have the political overlay as well.
We'll just have to see, and it's what it is. We will be here Friday morning, 8:30, the whole team, for a report on the American job economy. We'll go beneath the headline numbers at 8:30 on the two labor reports, the impact on the markets forward. from New York City. We need to get the markets open. Bloomberg Surveillance on YouTube.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo alongside Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney with your opening bell report. We've had a ton of economic data out this morning for traders to kind of turn to. Private payrolls increased 150,000 last month. That's according to ADP. Then you had recurring applications for U.S. jobless benefits rose for a 9th straight week in the longest stretch since 2018. Let's see the reaction on Wall Street as we get things started on this holiday shortened week. We have the S&P 500, little change right now, down about a point at 5,508. The Dow up 0.1%, 36 points at 39,377. The Nasdaq, little change, down 7 points at 18,020. We get to the 2-year yield, 4.74%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year, 4.40, and that is down 2 basis points. Now, globally, a lot of the spotlight continues to be on politics. Checking with the stock 600 right now, up 0.7%. We have the CAC in Paris up more than 1%. The dollar is Dollars weaker. Japanese yen weaker at 161.64 against the dollar. We have the euro stronger and the British pound stronger. Bitcoin down about 2% at 60,330. At the bell, checking in with Paramount. They're up 11%. That is your opening bell report. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. So a lot of our guests and strategists, they got this work from home backdrop where they drop some image behind. For those of you on Bloomberg Radio 1130 across America and worldwide, on YouTube, Battery Spencer is the best view of the Golden Gate Bridge. And that's actually where Scott Cronert hangs out.
He's a player.
I mean, you know, when you got a view out the back, you work from home when you're Scott Cronert.
Absolutely.
With a view like that of the Golden Gate Bridge at sunrise.
That's what I would do. I mean, Scott Cronert, he is the research head of U.S. equity strategy at Smith Barney, Solomon Smith Barney, and this
showing
place
your
called
age here,
Citi.
Smith Barney.
Exactly. I mean,
what
they
was
were the
that
players.
great phrase?
Oh gosh.
There's
I have to think about it.
We can't remember.
Think about it.
Brain
But the
freeze.
merger of Solomon,
We're
we
gonna
got
go.
the fixed income. Smith Barney got the equities. That's how it worked. Scott Cronert joins us here. He's head of U.S. strategy there at Citi. Hey, Scott, you and I were both there in the late 90s going into 2000 with the dot-com bust and the tech bubble and things like that. Some people are making some analogies to today about that. Do you buy that, or how do you differentiate the two time periods where, let's face it, tech is driving this market?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. It comes up frequently. I'm of the view that we're not in a bubble situation akin to what we were with in 99 and 2000. My underpinning view for this is that there are a lot more things going on under the surface. Valuations were increasing much more rapidly than was the ability for earnings growth to justify those valuations. And that's distinctly different right now. But more importantly, Paul, I think this is a real interesting twist, is that essentially what happened, in my humble opinion, is that Wall Street overcapitalized the internet infrastructure build-out opportunity. We raised so much money for companies to participate in this, and essentially what happened was you had a lot of companies that were doing business with each other, but using IPO proceeds. They weren't generated by traditional sales and cash.
Yep.
And so what ended up happening was that you had a lot of companies interacting with each other, but when one began to stumble fundamentally because the revenues didn't materialize quickly enough to support the valuations, the whole thing began to come unglued. That's much different than what we're dealing with right now. Yes, I get it. The Mag 7 to a certain degree are doing business with each other. But the premise here and the starting point is that these companies are generating incredible amounts of incremental free cash flow. Okay, so the premise from which they can make these investments is a much stronger and more sustainable starting point. So yeah, I get it. We're very attentive to where implied growth expectations are. At what point do the current genre of stocks get to where they're pricing in a fundamental opportunity that is just unrealistic? That's an important question, but it's much different than what was happening, in my view, in the tech bubble era.
So, Scott, given that case here, I mean, there still is that risk. You just kind of worry that, boy, if NVIDIA puts up a bad print, that could be a real problem for the market. Are we at that point now?
So we've been using this phrase "summer squall" as a concern for us as we go into the Q2 reporting period and the balance of Q3. And we have a measure that I think is the right way to look at stocks and the market, and it's an estimate of implied growth. Essentially, what you do is you take the valuation and you re-engineer the math to solve for what is the growth that's being implied in the valuation. And essentially what that tells you is that when it gets extended, which is where it is right now versus where we were, say, a quarter ago at this time, then what it does is puts an inordinate burden on companies to beat earnings expectations, but then raise guidance as well. So our concern is that you've begun to stretch our implied growth metric to a point where it's going to make the second quarter reporting period really interesting. And the burden's going to be on companies to beat, which I'm not overly concerned with. I think we'll see that. But to raise, and there I think the commentary coming out of C-suites is going to be a little bit more cautionary just because of the economic fraying that we seem to be seeing around the edges right now.
Across your securities analysis at Citigroup, Are companies and sectors trying to be more like these free cash flow generators and the unique capital allocation and margins, the profitability they have? To me, Scott, they're almost like 19th century Asian merchant banks, the way they own the high ground. Can other companies do this in other sectors?
You know, Tom, the answer in my view is yes. It's not every company, but it's many companies. And I think this is, part of the reason why I keep saying we're structurally bullish on S&P 500 fundamentals over the next couple of years. Yes, we have an argument that earnings will be less volatile in a recessionary condition because these companies are using technology to better manage their businesses. But remember, Tom, you're coming off of essentially 2 years of flattish earnings growth in aggregate for the S&P. This year is a positive inflection, but what comes with the earnings growth is this very notable improvement in free cash flow generation across the broader S&P 500. This is a big deal. What comes with free cash flow generation, no surprise, is financial flexibility. It puts you in a much better position to repurchase shares, increase dividends, pay down debt where it's coming due, and then essentially invest in future growth. So it becomes sort of an upward spiral in terms of how this manifests. Now, I get it. If the economy rolls over and earnings fade, so too will free cash. But I think you're spot on. I think more and more of corporate America in the notion of managing their businesses for shareholders are keenly focused on this.
Right.
And I think it's a really underplayed theme in this market.
I think people know that I've said this, Paul, and I can't emphasize it enough. And Michael Mauboussin was 30 years ahead of this at Credit Suisse, in that capital allocation and capital efficiency is the new religion.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I'm not sure I know where that religion's going, but they're literally managing for profitability, not for growth. And I know that's sacrilege when you look at Apple or Microsoft, but I'm sorry, they're managing for profit.
Yeah, I think that's what the market's looking for. All right, Scott, outside of tech, when you talk to your institutional investor and your retail clients, where are you telling them you're seeing some opportunities?
Yeah, so, we're playing a little bit different card right now. So, going into Q2, we did our usual sector and industry group update, and we're a solid holder of tech and comm services. So color us, market weight on the Mag 7. And I feel really strongly about this. I don't want to be out of these names, but I think where portfolio managers and many investors are going to make their incremental return opportunity is by where else to be engaged outside of the influence of this mega cap growth. So we want to hold that. Where do you go next? Where we're starting to line up is more aggressively down the path of what can benefit when we get to a Fed pivot point. Now, the City House view is that happens with the September Fed meeting, and then you get 3 cuts between now and year end. That's more aggressive than the market's currently anticipating. But what it has us doing is getting more interested in areas like consumer discretionary, including autos, which we went overweight back on Friday. Banks and financials. Again, here I think the banks are in an interesting position where they should benefit from a steeper curve, which we think will come over the course of the next year. Credit has been managed so far. The valuations are not a big issue in our view for the banks in aggregate. And then in addition, we've even gone overweight real estate, which is sort of controversial, but I get it. I mean, if you get some interest rate relief, you get to the point where the market's beginning to look out the other side of that, you begin to move down the path of where can I benefit from a gradual, eventual Fed pivot.
Scott, thank you so much. Scott Cronert with Citigroup. Greatly appreciated this morning. A green on the screen after the red that we saw in futures early, sort of like yesterday, a redux up. The VIX on a way to an 11 handle, 12.04. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom. Paul, Lisa, there is a busy schedule ahead for President Biden as he works to push back against growing pressure to step aside following last week's disastrous presidential debate. We get more with Bloomberg's Kevin Whitelaw.
White House is calling an all-staff meeting for today to try to rally the troops internally, as Bloomberg is reporting. And then he's set to do an interview with ABC News and George Stephanopoulos on Friday. That seems to be a pretty high-profile effort to create another moment where the president can maybe be seen engaging a little more substantively and lucidly than he was able to do during the debate.
Bloomberg's Kevin Whitelaw. The president's coming plans also include meetings with congressional leaders and Democratic governors, travel to Wisconsin and Philadelphia, and a news conference scheduled for next week at the NATO summit in Washington. Biden blamed travel plans for his debate performance, while his advisors say he was also battling a cold. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskiy says former President Trump should come forward with his plan to end the war with Russia quickly, something he boasted about on the campaign trail. In a nearly hour-long conversation with Bloomberg's Annmarie Hordern, Zelenskiy said he should know whether Trump's plan would put Ukraine's sovereignty at risk.
We are 40 million. We're a big country, and we really depend on the aid from the world. And we depend on the aid and the position and the stance of the U.S. So I would like to understand, what would it mean to finish war fast? Tomorrow, do we want the war to be over tomorrow? We didn't the war even to start. It was Putin who started it.
Speaking through an interpreter, Ukrainian President Zelensky said he's willing to meet with Trump in person to hear his proposals. You can hear the entire conversation on the Bloomberg Talks podcast. Jamaica is preparing as Hurricane Beryl heads toward the island. The Prime Minister declaring the island a disaster area before the major Category 4 storm arrives. Airports are closed and residents are stocking up on food and fuel ahead of the storm. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom Pauly.
And Michael Barr, thank you so much. Bear with us, folks. We've got to do this. It's in Barr's contract. It's the only way he's going to get in here Friday morning. This from Click on Detroit. Midway through another failed season, Derek Hitchinson says Detroit Tigers are trade deadline sellers once again. How's that going, Michael?
Quit giggling, Lisa. It's like, I know I have been giving it to the Yankees a little bit,
Thank you.
It's been terrible. I can't put it any other way.
Baltimore didn't do this. Baltimore didn't trade the kids away. Right?
No, they did not. That's why they are ahead of the Yankees right now.
Yep. And ownership, new ownership.
Yes.
Big positive. Big positive.
I think we know one of the owners, no? Yeah.
We know a lot of them.
So which Tigers should we watch if we never watch the Detroit Tigers? Which is the one that is going to go to the Houston Astros like Verlander did?
Well, that's a very good question. By the way, give it up for the Astros because they're like streaking all over the place.
Well, they finally, they come back.
Yeah.
Do you have a player for the Tigers that I need to watch this weekend?
No.
I
can't. I'm sorry. I love my Tigers, but I've got to be honest. I don't see any.
Okay. Did we do enough Detroit Tigers?
I think we did. That's
we
our
think
thing.
we checked that box. Dow up 14. Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Stocks, well, not much going on in stocks, but they're at record levels after the S&P 500 closed above 5,500 for the first time yesterday. So we have the S&P 500 right now, little change, up about 4 points, but at 5,514. The Dow up about 0.1%, 37 points, 39,368. And the NASDAQ, that's little change, up 7 points at 18,037. The 2-year yield, 4.74%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year, 4.40%, and that's down 2 basis points. We have commodities. Spot gold higher at $2,356 an ounce. Brent crude, $86 a barrel. WTI crude, $83 a barrel. Want to check in with shares of Tesla, still extending gains, up 3% after beating delivery estimates. Then we switch to earnings. Constellation Brands, its beer results topped estimates. Their shares, though, down nearly 1%. And since we're talking beer, a lot of people enjoy a nice cold one on vacation, but it looks like the beers won't have to be put on ice because there's a new travel trend because of higher temperatures. Coolcations. Yes, the Nordic tourism industry booming. Coolcations. Pack your parka on your next trip.
I saw that phrase today, and I get it because I've talked to people. You know, I mean, there was the news headlines in Greece and all the people dying. It's not funny, but it's just no fun anymore at 95 degrees. It's just too hot.
It is. So they're going to Scandinavia.
To Helsinki.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Helsinki was lovely. I didn't know that it's dark all winter. I'm there and the sun was out for like 18 hours.
Oh, yeah, at least.
I'm like, I can get used to this.
Yep.
And they're like, Tom, February. Think about it. Lisa Mateo. Thank you so much. Our heads are spinning over the news flow. Paul, what's the number one thing you're focused on in this blur of economics, finance, investment, and politics in 14 nations?
I mean, you're exactly right, Tom. It's the political, I think, uncertainty that you have to put into the calculus here. We talked to Freya Beamish, an economist over there at TS Lombard, and she says, you know, when you think about the economic outlook for Europe, boy, you got to really think about the changes in the political landscape of the UK, of France, and that's certainly true. And you're here in the U.S., you have to think as we approach the November elections, who's going to be in the White House, who's going to be in Congress, and how will that impact? And we're seeing a lot of research coming out of Wall Street kind of framing out, you know, in a Biden administration, a Trump administration, what are the economic impacts?
Okay, you know, I want to get this in right now. Matt Miller is literally speaking as we speak to Pierre Gasly, who's one of my favorite people in Formula One. The headline here, Paul, is Gasly resigns with Alpine, which is right now is the time. There's 20 teams. They each have 2 drivers.
Okay.
Or there's 10 teams.
10 teams.
They have 2 drivers.
Okay.
So the entire sport is 20 bodies.
Okay.
And we're right now after Austria, which was really amazing, and before Qatar, where like literally half the people don't know where they're going to drive next year, who they're going to drive for.
Interesting.
And they're getting really nasty, like out on the track. Like Gasly and his partner are bouncing off each other at 150 miles an hour because they hate each other like I hate Mike Regan. I mean, it's really ugly. Pierre Gasly with Matt Miller right now. We'll give you a report on that.
Over there.
He resigns with Alpine. Qatar this weekend. I really look forward to that. Right now, we're going to dive into a conversation, and we're going to do this with humility for people that have been wrong. Mike Regan has a checklist at his desk of how many times Tom Keene has been wrong. It goes on. Crumpton had it down onto the floor. What do strategists do when they're wrong? It's so hard to turn it around, isn't it?
Absolutely. And, a big story today hitting the terminal is JP Morgan's Marko Kolanovic leaving the firm. This is a guy who I remember I wrote about him in 2015.
Bear Stearns-ish at JP Morgan?
Well, back then, Marco was the first guy to really start writing about how the quant trades were influencing the markets. You know, the volatility targeting, commodity trading advisors, CTAs. No one had really unpacked any of that before he did, starting about a decade ago. And his first sort of couple years on the scene there, he was eerily correct. I remember I referred to him as Gandalf in a column in 2015.
Did you invent that phrase for him, Gandalf?
I
Were
did,
you the one that wrote that?
For better or worse, I did.
My word, we're among royalty.
But he's not quite Gandalf in the last few years. And I think it's just, look, the stock market's insanely complicated. He did really have eerily correct calls there for several years, based on basically the influence of the quants on the market. So I don't know, why he's been wrong. What in his methodology is causing him to be too bearish the last few years? But
I think it's a book. It's like a Sebastian Mallaby. This is a huge deal, folks. If you're not part of Global Wall Street, and to sit here with Mike Regan that changed the language of derivative strategy, I'm serious. I mean, I'm going to go on this. Paul's going to get a question in here, but I've got up a 5-trend Wells Wilder chart that would make David Keller blush, and we're going to go into that in a moment. Paul, ask a question of Gandalf.
Well, our own Bloomberg's own Alexandra Semenova broke this news, and she's got the great reporting on the Bloomberg terminal, so check that out, and on Bloomberg.com as well. But it's not. I'm sure J.P. Morgan they don't do these things lightly, because your strategist is really the face of your research department in a lot of ways, to the media, for example. So, but he was wrong in 2022 when the markets were down,
right?
And then he's missed the rally. So that's 2 big strikes,
right. And to be sure, we don't really know exactly why he left. I mean, I think we can jump to the conclusion that if you're wrong for a couple years straight, you're probably not, your career's not going to last too long at a big bank like J.P. Morgan. A big bank like that doesn't want to be out there as sort of the most bearish voice on Wall Street. It just doesn't make sense for a sell side firm to be that way. And so, especially when you're wrong about it for a couple of years going, you can imagine there is some pressure there on him.
I'm looking at a quarterly chart, folks. We could do this with Regan because he's a nerd. I'm going to do this back 20 plus years. A quarterly chart, and I'm using George Kleinman exponential moving averages. I'm not going to go into it, folks. People drive off the Garden State Parkway.
No, please.
But there's been, other than the great financial crisis, there's been one teensy-weensy, itty-bitty sell signal for a cup of coffee in 2022. And other than that, the trend, as Gartman would say, is from the lower left to the upper right. How can you be negative?
The stock market goes up way more often than it goes down on any time frame you look at it. I mean, was it 8 out of 10 years it's posting a gain? So, the fallback position for a strategist as far as job security is to be bullish, right? Because often something that does cause a big negative year in the market is something that no one saw coming, a COVID, a great financial crisis. So you can always fall back on, hey, who saw COVID coming, or no one, at least none of the major strategists saw the GFC coming.
We got to go. I just figured this out, Paul. The reason Regan gets the $200 lunches that we don't get, Redo, keeper of the Amex, knows that he invented Gandalf.
Oh, there you go.
That's what I didn't know that.
I didn't know that either. That's
$200 is my yearly allowance for lunchtime. Are you kidding me?
And it gets you. Tell me, Sparta. He goes to me the other day. This show is a huge success. It's great. Let's go to lunch. And I'm like thinking Michael's or Four Seasons. I'm down at McDonald's, and we're market tested the $5 new meal at McDonald's on 3rd Avenue. Mike Regan, thank you for this. And there'll be a lot of reporting, and I'm going to say this for all of us on Team Surveillance, immense respect to the strategists, the analysts, as they struggle to get it right and buy, hold, and sell.
Yep.
I mean, it's like, Paul, you got to keep going.
Yeah. No, I'm done.
Are you done?
I'm done.
You're walking out now?
Exactly.
That's criminal.
I know, exactly.
Wait, they just told me Mike Regan's going to be here at 12 noon?
He's coming back. I mean,
it's holiday programming and a holiday lengthened work week.
I'm on the early train to the Jersey Shore.
On the deck?
I'm taking the 10:43 train to the Jersey Shore.
Okay.
Boom. Okay. Now, I just saw Lisa Mateo racing out, so she's going to beat me.
She's going to see Springsteen play.
Yeah, exactly.
I hope he plays. He was hurt or something. I'm not sure he's out there.
Yeah, no, he's back. They're back on the road, but they took some time off. I think they might be still out, so we'll have to see. But he'll be back. He'll be back.
Okay, memo, Friday. Be with us, 8:30, the jobs report. Good morning from New York City.